Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's live discussion. We're here with joined by a special guest, my sister Alyssa. We're here to talk about the first 3 seasons of Star Trek Voyager. Now, it has been actually quite a while, maybe 3 or 4 years since I've seen Voyager. I did watch the whole entire thing. However, Alyssa is in the midst of rewatching Voyager, so I thought it would be great to jump on here. And the excuse I have to talk about Star Trek is great with me, and sort of have our little discussion about Voyager. So, Alyssa, thanks so much for joining us for this Voyager discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks for doing this discussion. It's been a while. We did do Deep Space Nine last year, I think, because I was doing my Deep Space Nine rewatch. And I have now gotten on to Voyager. I'm slowly trying to get through every Star Trek series, every completed Star Trek series. I may even rewatch Discovery and Picard as far as it's gotten, and Lower Decks. But I'm thinking more of the old 5, the original 5 shows. I am up to Voyager now, and then I'll do Enterprise after I'm finished with Voyager. So thanks for coming on and discussing that with me.
No problem. As I said, any excuse to talk about Voyager. And then Matthew Ross in the chat there jumping the gun a bit with the long road getting from here, because Alyssa says she's doing Enterprise next. We're talking about Voyager now.
Yes, but it really has been a long road getting from there to here, I'm just going to say.
I think I exhausted my referencing the theme song during our Expanse discussion. I made a point to do it every single week.
Yeah. I think Cardinal Doomsday was not a fan of that. I'm surprised that he's still sticking with you after all of your subjecting him to the Enterprise theme song.
All right. So did you want to sort of just talk about what it was like rewatching Voyager, it has been years since you've seen it, right?
It has been years, and there's a reason for that. So I just kind of want to talk about where I'm at coming into Voyager, what my feelings were after I watched Voyager the first time. To me, Next Generation is up here. You can't even see my hand. It's out of the screen. Deep Space Nine is a little bit lower, and Voyager's down here. And Enterprise is hovering around in the same area. I don't know. I'd have to watch it again and tell you which one I like better. I feel like the average Trek fan likes Voyager more than I do. And I don't think it's bad. I've never thought it's a bad show. I've always thought it was pretty mediocre. And I felt after my first watch of it that Voyager kind of failed as a series because it set out in the beginning. It seemed like its goal was, we're going to do a whole new thing. We're leaving the Alpha Quadrant. We're going off into this whole new part of the galaxy. It's all going to be new and different. And it wasn't. Like, I feel like, and this is, I'll just talk about my feeling after watching it the first time and then tell you how I feel after watching the first 3 seasons in a rewatch. But after watching it through the first time, my feeling was that 80 to 90% of the episodes could have easily taken place in the Alpha Quadrant, minus 1 or 2 throwaway lines at the beginning, like, oh, we're going to this planet because we need such and such a resource because we're in the Delta Quadrant and we can't just go refill at the nearest starbase or whatever. But then the heart of the episode could have easily taken place in the Alpha Quadrant. And then in later seasons, they just bring back the Borg and kind of do Borg overkill. And so they're not doing anything new and different at all. They're just going back to the Borg again. So I felt like Voyager kind of failed as a series. Overall, however, there were some great episodes, really great episodes that I would rank amongst some of the best in all Trek shows. So it's not to say that it was terrible or anything like that. I just felt it to be kind of mediocre. And now I've gone back and I have rewatched the first 3 seasons, and it's just kind of reinforced my feeling that Voyager is extremely mediocre. Though I am concerned about The seasons 5 through 7 specifically, I saw you do a review recently when you talked about how bad those seasons are, and I honestly think there's a lot of those seasons I've never seen. There are some that I do remember from those seasons. I do have a feeling I've started season 4 that I'm probably going to agree with you that 4 is going to end up being the best. But I'm concerned about your saying that 5 through 7 aren't good, because I don't think 1 through 3 are as good as you do. I don't think they're bad. I think they're mediocre. I come away feeling like Voyager is just like spectacularly mediocre, and not terrible, not great. And one thing I will say, like, from a 2021 lens, and I think I've heard you talk about this too, Mark, that Voyager really would have benefited from being more serialized. I can't stress that enough after watching the first 3 seasons. In fact, we might get into it in a little bit. I see a couple of areas where they could have explored something in a more serialized manner. And then in season 2 particularly, there's a couple of not serialized, but recurring storylines that I thought sucked. So it's got to be serialized and good. So there's lots of ways I think they could have done that. But I know you've talked about it in your channel before, like such and such a producer. You probably remember which ones. You could probably tell me in a minute which ones didn't want it to be serialized. And you think about it, like, this is about, I mean, Lost is really the first really popular serialized show, at least that I became aware of. Maybe there's something before that I didn't watch. But so Voyager is like 10 years before that. And serialization wasn't really a thing, and certainly not in Star Trek. So it would have, Deep Space Nine did it to a degree with the Dominion War, and it was way ahead of its time even doing that. It wasn't really a thing then, but there are several instances when I just watched a show, I'm like, it could have been one of the greatest Trek shows ever if it had been serialized. There's so much more they could have done. And I know you have mentioned, Mark, that one of them wanted to do the Year of Hell as a whole season, which would have been amazing, but they didn't. And I'll talk about that. There's another thing that I think they could have done in season 2, particularly, that I would have liked. But I don't know. It's so far through the first 3 seasons, I'm just having my feelings reinforced that it's mediocre. But I also haven't come across too many really awful episodes. It's not sitting through the first couple seasons of TNG or Enterprise or even Deep Space Nine. So that's good. There haven't been as many really, really bad episodes.
Just wait until you get to Enterprise first 2 seasons.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to it. I've actually rewatched seasons 3 and 4 of Enterprise in recent years, like within, I don't know, 5 or 10 years or something like that. But I haven't rewatched the first 2 seasons of Enterprise, and I'm really dreading it. but I have to do it. I gotta watch them all. Gotta go through all of them. So that is where I'm kind of coming in at Voyager. And I have an open mind. I'm a little worried about seasons 5 through 7 after what you said in your recent review of Eye of the Needle, but we'll see.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Maybe you'll disagree with me. Maybe you won't dislike 5 through 7 as much as I do. Maybe it's just my personal preference that I prefer 1 and 2. We'll get to 3 later. So the thing about 5 through 7 is, I think, in my opinion, some people disagree, but I feel very strongly that how you were talking a bit earlier about how Voyager kind of would have been better if it was serialized and was fighting serialization. It seemed to be incredibly less serialized than 5, 6, and 7. It seemed like they went out of their way to make every episode. I think the problem also that you just said about how a lot of episodes could have just taken place easily in the Alpha Quadrant, that seemed worse in 5, 6, and 7. And I guess we'll talk about 5, 6, and 7 later, but they actually had the idea to bring him back in the Alpha Quadrant, which I think they should have, because they might as well have been there. There was like no point in having them in the Delta Quadrant at stage, other than, oh, we're in the Borg's territory, which again that was a whole stupid thing as well. So that was my main problem with. And to be fair, I think there are some great episodes in 5 and 6, and maybe the first half of 7. The second half of 7 is complete garbage, but just because they were getting ready for Enterprise and they didn't give a fuck about it. But it's not like 5 and 6 and the first half of 7. It's not like they totally suck. There's some great episodes there, but they're not serialized where they should have been, and they all could have easily taken place in the Alpha Quadrant. Easily. Like, I think, and that's part of the reason why I like season 1 and 2 so much, is because this, comparatively speaking, it actually felt like it was in the Delta Quadrant compared to the rest of the series, and actually felt like there was a community on the ship, and it felt like there was an ongoing storyline about a ship being trapped alone, which, to me, I think they almost completely abandoned that idea in later seasons. So yeah, I also wanted to say hello to everyone in the chat. I see Matthew Ross, Cardinal Doomsday, and Allison Fordyce. Thanks so much for Allison. You don't like it when I say your full name, but anyway, thanks so much.
Well, you should change your name, your screen name, if you don't want us to say Allison Fordyce, because we're just tempted to read the whole name.
Well, I'm like the the anchor man who just read.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
The thing, oh god, yeah. Matthew Ross, season 1 and 2 are more solid than 5, 6, or 7. Yeah, so he agrees with me. Yeah, I agree with that. I think. And if your opinion, I guess I can see why you're scared if your opinion 1 and 2 isn't that great.
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I don't think they're bad. And we'll get into it in just a minute. But I do think as we go through here, though, I think there's going to be some disagreements we might find on both sides, where you'll say an episode is really great and I'll say, yeah, it's mediocre. And you'll say an episode is really terrible and I'll say, yeah, it's mediocre. Especially once we get into season 3, because you mentioned that you thought like the first part of season 3 was terrible. I think it's mediocre. So I don't know. I guess we'll get to that. So I think we'll have disagreements on both ends, where I'll say something's mediocre and you'll go one on into the other. But I also know that we do agree on certain episodes as well. So
yeah, I mean, but I seem to recall, like, when we were younger and when Voyager was first coming on, I seem to recall liking the show more than you did.
You did, yeah. You always have. You always have liked it more than me.
I wouldn't put it like, yeah, I wouldn't do the whole thing Next Generation. For me, of course, is Deep Space Nine, Next Generation, and then Voyager maybe here, and then Enterprise. But actually, since 3 and 4 will be here. If you're talking about first,
yeah,
below the screen.
Enterprise is probably still a little bit below Voyager for me, but I would have to, I can't really say until I've rewatched all of it.
It's weird comparing them, because Voyager is the strange thing where I think throughout the entire 7 seasons runs, there's great episodes, but it's like you said, the majority are mediocre to bad, but there's just some great episodes sprinkled in, whereas Enterprise is like total, like, bipolar. First 2 seasons are terrible and season 3 and 4 are great. So it's a bit hard, but I think overall I think Voyager has the stronger premise, the stronger characters, and the stronger setup and the stronger foundation than Enterprise does.
Yeah.
Anyway. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
David Haney in the chat is expressing opinions that I know you disagree with, Mark, because I have heard you push back on that opinion before.
After season 2 and 3, it's very... So after season 2 and 3, so after season... I think he's saying, so season 4, so after 2 and 3 got good, which... I don't push back at saying the season 4 is when it got good because I think that's the best season. But if they're saying season 3 is when it got good, yes, that I would have a really strong opposition to that opinion. Anywho, yeah, a lot going on in the chat. It's hard to keep up with it all. The fight, yeah. You haven't seen the fight yet. You have to get till season 5 for that. I think I tried to get you to watch it once so we could make fun of it.
Yeah, I was like, why would I want to watch a bad episode intentionally to make fun of it? I don't want to do that.
Remember how much fun we had making fun of that stupid movie? What was it called? Like Mortal Engine?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but I didn't do it. Like we watched it hoping it would be good.
Oh, hey, it's Darren from D.
Yeah, D's Reviews, Darren. Yay! I'm gonna be with Darren next week on his channel talking about Loki. Looking forward to it.
And I'll be there the week after.
Yeah. Super looking forward to it.
This show's amazing. I can't wait to see more of it.
Yeah. All right, shall we get into?
Yeah, let's get into it. Oh, Matthew Ross, the alternative factor versus the fight, which is better? Come on, if you don't know my opinion of the alternative factor, if you're asking that question, I actually like that episode. I'm sorry. It's actually one of my it's in my top 20 favorite original series episodes, which blows everyone's mind because for some reason they think that's one of the worst, if not the worst original series episode. And I made a whole video where I ranted against how much I disagreed with that.
Yeah, and I don't think it's as good as you do, but it's not one of the bad ones for me. And I got so many comments on my top 10 worst TOS episode video. Where's alternative factor? You can't, this is not a true list. There's no alternative factor on it. I'm like, but I just don't think it's that bad.
Anyway, cool. So let's go ahead and get into season. Let's start with season 1. So we're going to go season by season. We're going to talk about the season overall, and then we're going to give some of our favorite and least favorite episodes from each season. So let's start with season 1. So me personally, this is my second favorite season of the show behind season 4 because I think this is it's not so much there's like a lot of great episodes that blow me away. It's more of I like the overall tone of it. I think this is where they were best at the ongoing character stories. And this is something I talked about in my recent review, is that it felt more like a community in space, whereas other ships, it felt like any random starship that could have been the Alpha Quadrant in later seasons that was just attacked by random aliens every week because they need action. Where here, the show felt more character focused and more focused on what the impact of these people being alone and trapped were. And they did do some missteps for sure, and they were avoiding serialization. If they weren't avoiding it so much, it would have been better. But I still really like it. I still really like season 1 of Voyager. Anyway, your thoughts?
Yeah, it will be hard for me to say where it compares amongst all of the other seasons until I've watched them all. But I can comment on what you have been telling me recently, a bunch of times in recent years, that Voyager has the best season 1. And when I'm looking at, particularly, TOS is its own thing, but when looking at the all the 90s and 2000s shows, Enterprise, TNG, DS9, and Voyager, I agree. It did have the best season 1 out of all of those. But that's a pretty low bar to clear. I mean, I don't think that says a whole lot. Like, it's like saying, oh, like, well, I have this stale burger with day-old bread, and that's better than eating a shit sandwich. But that doesn't make the stale burger like good. It's just better than the shit sandwich, and that's kind of how I think. I mean, Voyager's better than season 1's better than a stale burger. It's not a totally accurate analogy, but I found it to be spectacularly mediocre. Like I actually had a very difficult time in picking we each decided we were going to pick 3 best or 3 favorite and 3 least favorite. I had a difficult time because to me, like the best are like a little above average. Like there's no 9s or 10s for me. Like probably 7 or 8 is the best, and there's no 1, 2s or 3s for me in a scale of 10. So probably 4 or 5 is probably the lowest. So it's like a lot of average, and then like I have to find the ones that are slightly better and slightly worse. That's how I see season 1. But definitely the ones that are bad I aren't good. I didn't enjoy. And then the ones that I'm going to list as my favorites are good. I did really like them, but they're not truly great Star Trek episodes compared to some of the other great Star Trek episodes I've seen. And then in between, a lot of mediocre episodes. And I will say my overall experience with season 1 was enjoyable. I enjoyed it. So when I talk about all the mediocrity, this is not to say like I don't enjoy it or it's bad or anything like that. I did, in season 1 especially, I did walk away from it like enjoying the experience overall. It was good to revisit these characters, how they first started out in the Delta Quadrant, which I haven't done a full season rewatch in a while. I've done a few episodes here and there. We did that time travel top 25 recently, which caused me to have to go watch some Voyager episodes. And I've watched some other ones for other reasons recently, but I haven't watched the full season in a while, and I enjoyed it. But I don't think it's amazing, and I don't think it's terrible.
Yeah, for me, it's still easily the best season 1 of all of Star Trek, barring the original series. I think by a significant amount. And I don't know. I just think I have a much higher opinion of it. But as far as picking the episodes, it's going to be interesting to compare them, because for me, for seasons 1 and 2, it was polarizing. There were some that I looked in my overall top 20 of Voyager, and there were 3 in my top 20 best for both seasons 1 and 2, and 3 in my top 20 worst for seasons 1 and 2. Season 3 is where I was having a hard time. I had to go all the way to my top 50 to find 3, but all 3 of my worst were in the top 5 for season 3 of the entire show. So that's going to be a different beast. But anyway, we're jumping. I'll get to season 3 when we get there. Do you want to just go ahead and jump into some of the episodes of season 1 of Voyager? I figured go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to point out, just as a little teaser, Matthew Ross listed a bunch of episodes that are some of the best for him in season 1. One of those is on my least favorite list, and I won't tell you which one until we get to it.
I don't think one is for me.
Yeah, one of those is one of my lesser favorite ones. But we'll
actually, one of them was mine. Yeah, actually, I'm looking at it. Yeah.
But we'll get to it. I don't want to spoil anything, so we'll get to it.
That's interesting. So I figured for season 1, you could go first with the best. I go first with the worst. We switch it up for season 2, and then season 3 go back to that. So if you want to start with your favorite, I should say, episode of season 1.
Well, I picked 2, and one of them you just did a review for, and you gave it a 10. So I'm gonna I'll leave that one to you because I know it's on your list for sure. The other one that I would like to talk about is Phage. I actually thought, and I had forgotten how much I liked the Vidians and how. This was like the anti-Ferengi episode. I think it was around the same. Wasn't it episode 4 of TNG where they introduced the Ferengi? It was around the same time.
Yeah, 4 or 5.
This was like the anti-Ferengi episode. This was the way to introduce a new villain, and they were such an interesting villain because they. You kind of could have some empathy for them because they've suffered through this horrible, horrible disease for centuries, and but they're not good guys either. So it was a very interesting dynamic. And on the one hand, it's a shame that the Vidians went off the show, but on the other hand, if you're not going to do serialization, like they kind of ran out of. I mean, they were running out of things to do with them. I think if they wanted to get really creative and go in different directions, they could have done different things with them. But the way they were going, like they had run their course, and also it does make sense that Voyager has been traveling for 2 years, heading toward the Alpha Quadrant. Probably not a lot of Vidians are traveling 2 years away from home, so it does make sense that they would leave Vidian space. So I kind of get why they had to move away from them, but I like them, and this is probably my favorite Vidian episode. It was the first one, so Phage is one of my favorite episodes.
That actually surprises me. I kind of thought this episode was a mediocre one. I like the Vidians as a concept, but I didn't think this was a particularly strong introduction to them. And the main thing that bothers me about this episode is the scenes with Neelix in sickbay whining to the doctor and complaining about every little thing. That got really grating on my nerves. And plus, when I did a review of this episode, I kind of went on the rails about how Janeway was like way too lenient on these Vidians. It's like, if you ever show up here again, if I ever see you again, I am going to talk loudly to you. But it was okay. It was interesting. I agree that I liked the Vidians as a concept. I just wasn't the biggest fan of this particular episode.
Yeah, I liked this. This is my favorite Vidian episode. I liked it a lot better than the one. I forget the name of it because I didn't end up picking it for one of my least favorite, but I didn't love it. The one where they split B'Elanna into two. I thought that was dumb.
See, for that episode, I liked everything except for the B'Elanna splitting in two. I thought the portrayal of the Vidians as prisoners and whatnot was great, but the whole story about splitting B'Elanna in two was dumb.
Yeah.
So that episode's kind of down the middle.
Yeah, and Neelix whining definitely has points against this. This was probably be like a 7 out of 10 for me. As I said, there's no great episodes in this season.
It's probably like a 7 out of 10 for me. Maybe it's 6. I can't remember what I gave it.
Yeah, but like I just think that overall, compared to the rest of the season, you probably have other episodes you like better, and I just don't. Like I do have one more.
Okay, so let me get to my favorite of season 1, which actually isn't the episode I did the review for. That's my second favorite. So
okay, what's your number one favorite?
So my number one, and I'll be interested to hear your opinion on this because for me, this is a 10. I love this. I think it was in my top 10 best Voyager episodes of the entire show, and that's the episode Jatrell with Neelix, where he has to encounter this alien who was responsible for this weapon of mass destruction that decimated his planet and killed his family. I thought, for first of all, and I think I saw behind the production news that kind of confirmed, because as soon as I saw this episode, it was the penultimate episode of season 1. I'm like, they're trying to be like Duet, aren't they? And I saw production news that they were actually trying to emulate, and they don't do as good of a job, of course, but I still thought this was an extremely powerful episode. That dream sequence they had with Neelix, where he was freaking out and having the guilt over pretending to be this war hero, but really he was a deserter, and his guilt over that. I thought the way they played that was brilliant, and I always cite this episode as my favorite Cass and Neelix episode too, because I love the way she comforts him. I love the chemistry they had together, and I think the exploration of this, you think of him as this evil guy that Neelix totally despises, but he's so riddled with guilt that he's made it his life's purpose to actually try to save the people he killed, but of course it's in vain. And I thought that was I gotta admit to tearing up several times when I saw it. So I absolutely love this episode. I'm curious to hear what you thought of it.
It's all right. It's mediocre. I did notice the duet thing, and it seemed very contrived. It seems like Neelix's backstory came out of absolute nowhere. I think they just contrived that just for this episode, and it seemed the whole thing seemed a little forced to me. They were trying to force another duet, and that wasn't terrible or anything. Like it was fine. It was decent for a Neelix episode, but the whole thing seemed a little forced for me. So I give this is probably a 6 or 7 for me.
Wow. See, here's the thing. I kind of agree. And in fact, I think I mentioned that in my own review that they did this backstory for Neelix did kind of come out of nowhere, and it would have been better had they built up to it. Again, serialization. But I didn't hold it that much against it. Like, I thought the actual, what they did with the episode itself and the actor was freaking amazing. It's this dude, we've seen him in Star Trek tons of times before. He played like a Romulan in Defector. He played Alexander's son from the future. Alexander from the future. Yeah. But, so yeah, I still love it. I still thought it was a great episode.
Yeah, one of these days I'd like you, or if you don't do it, I might do it, like a top 10 recurring Star Trek actors, because there's a bunch of them who have been in a lot of episodes. Yeah. And he's one that I like. But yeah,
Okay. All right. So why don't you get to your next best one?
My next best one probably is also your next best one, I'm guessing, because you gave it a 10. I just saw your review for it recently. It's Eye of the Needle. I'd probably give it an 8. I mean, it's probably it's probably my favorite of season 1, but it's good. It was a very interesting. I mean, it kind of reminded me of. It was the better version of what's the name of that Deep Space Nine episode that I didn't really like that much toward the end of season 5, where they were talking to this woman who was stranded on the planet, and she was the psychiatrist for Bashir, and Bashir was
6.
It was season 6. Okay, Bashir
the
and
sound of her voice.
And Cisco were giving her all telling her all their problems, and she was helping them. And turns out she was in the past the whole time, and it was very predictable. And this episode kind of reminded me of that, because it had the twist that, the person that you're communicating with across space is actually across time. So this one was better. This was the, I don't know which one of those came out first. I'm not sure what year that was, but this one was definitely the better version of that concept. It was a little predictable at the end. Once you find out that this is a time thing, it was like, this guy's so dead. Like when Tuvok's like, he's died. And like, of course he did. It was a great. Also, I had this, it's like the 6th episode, and I believe you said this would have in your review that this would have been great toward the end of the series, because it would have been better with the stakes being higher. Like the 6th episode, there's no way they're going back, so and it kind of takes away from it a little bit, because there's no way in hell that they're like gonna get back to the Alpha Quadrant 6 episodes in. But it was still a very good concept. It was a really good character episode for a lot of the different characters. And overall, I think it's my favorite episode of season 1, actually. So, I really enjoyed this one.
So I got a comment. Colonel Doomsday asked me to turn up my volume. Alyssa's way louder than me, but I can't. Like, I'd have to go into my systems, and it'll take a long time. So I'll just try to speak closer to the microphone. Maybe that will help.
Or sometimes you lose control of the tone of your voice. Go.
Anyway, so yeah, no, I absolutely agree with everything. You probably already know what I think of this episode.
Yeah, we can say it again.
But yeah, pretty much agree with everything you just said. I thought that it was it's up there for my favorite. It's like, I would say it's almost tied for my favorite of season 1. I think this is also it might not be my top 10 Voyager, it might be like top 12, but it's definitely like up there. It's always been one of my favorite Voyager episodes. And for me, like, the reason why I went on this long rant about season 5, 6, and 7 in my review about this episode, because this episode to me encapsulates everything that they lost in later seasons, like the stuff that made the why I like season 1 and 2 better, particularly how they didn't have to have a threat of the week. Like you'll get to it. Is every single episode in the later seasons, boom, some weird alien attacks Voyager. Happens like it's every single fucking time. And I love how this was like, there was no sort of threat. There was no, so it was a character base with a bit of sci-fi intrigue thrown into it. And plus I just love the way it handled the crew situation and how Janeway was trying to look after the community. This is again something I think this show should have kept throughout its entire run, and I was a bit disappointed that they lost it in this. Yeah, and I love this episode. I think it's one of the best examples of that. And I went on this whole dissection of the scene where Tuvok revealed that that the Telek guy was dead. I thought, and it was brilliant acting. I loved everything about the way that the whole scene was portrayed. And I think I got into this fan speculation that the Romulans sort of hid that information they knew the whole time, Voyager. But that, of course, that's just like headcanon. But it's interesting to think about.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I guess I'll get into my third best episode of season 1, since you just named my second best. And this is also another favorite of mine. I don't know if I did give this one a 10 as well, and it was in my top 20, I think. It's the episode Prime Factors, where Voyager meets this Italian guy. It's like, come to my planet and let me give you pleasure. Because that was really cheesy. I actually, again, I love the character story. To me, this is an amazing character story that got into like the fracturing of the crew and how desperate they were to go home, that they were willing to defy Janeway's orders, and the sort of splintering of the crew, and how you had unlikely allies, like that Joe Carey was, a huge thorn in B'Elanna's side, but all of a sudden he's willing to team up with Seska and to because for the ultimate goal of getting home. And I absolutely love the scene where they go to set the device and Tuvok shows up, like, oh fuck, it's Tuvok, and Tuvok's like, oh, you beat me to it, I was about to do it myself. And like, what? And then to see and I bought that. Like, I totally bought Tuvok's motivations, which is why I thought that really worked. And then the scene at the end where Janeway, when they almost destroyed the ship by setting this device, and Janeway's reaction to this, like, blanket betrayal, and how she did chastise B'Elanna because she was kind of, like, on shaky ground to begin with. But how with Tuvok, she didn't chastise him. She was mainly just showed... It was such an emotional scene because it was just all the blanketed with the complete disappointment and feeling of betrayal that she felt. And you could feel, even though he was a Vulcan, you could, and this was an amazing performance by Tim Russ, by the way, that you could, even through his Vulcan exterior, you could tell how devastated he was to have disappointed his good friend like that. So I love this episode. I thought it was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it like that, yeah, it was pretty good. I actually kind of just sort of forgot about that episode. Like, it was not really memorable for me. And I think a lot of it has to do with the lack of serialization. Like, yes, it was a very emotional moment between Janeway and Tuvok, and then boom, like, there's no ramifications. And this is true of all Star Trek. All Star Trek series do this, where there's just no after results. So then I just kind of forget about it. But yeah, I mean, as a singular episode, it was pretty good. I just kind of didn't even, I forgot. I just kind of sort of thought about the Italian guy and and Harry Kim meeting that girl and then going into the faraway place, and I kind of forgot about the things you just talked about. But yeah, you're right. I wouldn't give it a 10, but I like that episode.
See, I kind of like the Italian guy too, because it showed that he was like very fickle, and his mean for he seemed like a really nice guy. Let me give you pleasure. It was all for like his own self.
Come and have some pasta and pizza. My name is Mario.
yeah, and you can tell that that his motivations weren't pure either. So why should they? And it really muddled the whole sort of situations. Why should they respect this planet's laws when these people aren't like? But that Harry Kim thing, it just sort of made me think of really what a geek he was. Where this hot chick wanted to make out with him, and all he could do was obsess over this piece of technology. I'm like, Jesus Christ, Harry Kim, can't you think about this an hour later? But anyway, so yeah, so that's it for our best ones. So I guess we'll move over to the worst ones.
Well, before we do that, there was something that I wanted to talk about in season 1, my overview, that I forgot to.
Okay, sure.
Something that, and it's actually going to tie into one of my lesser favorite episodes. And what I've really noticed, going back and watching season 1, is, especially after just having watched Deep Space Nine, which really set up the Maquis, is that I don't buy that the Maquis eased into the crew way too easily, especially Chakotay. And with B'Elanna, they had one episode where B'Elanna was rogue and blah, 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 and she doesn't deserve to be chief engineer. And at the end of it, she's chief engineer, and then her and Janeway are best buddies from there on out, except they go back a little bit, like that one episode you just mentioned, but then they're best buddies again. And Chakotay, by the end of in season 2, he's like giving speeches about how great the Federation is, and like Federation values and Starfleet values. Like, but you remember the Maquis. And I'll be perfectly honest, based on what I have seen from the Maquis and Maquis cell leaders before, there's a season 3 episode called The Worst Case Scenario, where they stumble upon this holodeck program that Tuvok had made to prepare for a potential mutiny by the Maquis. And the way Chakotay is behaving in that, a little more realistic to a Maquis cell leader. I'm sorry. Like, Chakotay, the way he behaves in this show is just like, okay, I guess I'm in Starfleet again. And like, but the whole thing about the Maquis is like they're anti-Starfleet. And they try to give you a little bit of it here and there, but I just didn't feel like I saw enough of it. And most of it comes from Seska, who it turns out to be a Cardassian spy. So I felt like that's the thing. If they had really explored that, like, and really gone serialized with it and had all these inner conflicts and made it more interesting, then it would be like dark and, oh no, it's going against Roddenberry's vision, blah, blah, blah. But it would have been darker to do that, but it would have been more interesting. I feel like they kind of, I don't know, PG'd it or something to make it. So I just had to throw that in there because it ties into one of my episodes.
Oh yeah, that's also something I railed against in my review of season 1 and my review of Caretaker, and how this is actually something Ronald D. Moore said himself. He said this was sort of the ruin of Voyager. The was the end of the first episode where all of a sudden Chakotay shows up in the Starfleet uniform. He's saying that was a huge mistake and that it should have taken them a long time to integrate, which is something closer to the style he did on Battlestar Galactica. And yeah, I completely agree with that. And I had gotten pushback for some people, but that was again those producers. Rick Berman was the dude you're thinking of, whose name I said, who was constantly fighting against serialization, who was constantly saying, no, we have to have them in Starfleet uniforms so the audience knows they're going to be Starfleet officers. I'm like, that's stupid. Like that, why make them the Maquis? Like, it really defeats the whole purpose of having a Maquis there if they're just going to integrate. I mean, sure, you get this stupid episode with Tuvok throwing basketballs at the Maquis don't know how to behave properly, but that still kind of defeats the purpose of why even have the Maquis if you're going to integrate them. So
yeah, I mean, they could have gone in two directions. They could have gone full Maquis and made it, darker but way more interesting, or they could just not make them the Maquis at all. Maybe they're another starship, and maybe Chakotay is the captain of the other starship, and they have to decide who's going to be the captain because they can't both be captain, or something like that, or some other thing where it's not the Maquis because it was completely, especially after just having watched Deep Space Nine last year and seeing how the Maquis behaved. This was very jarring. It's very against their character to behave this way.
Yep. Absolutely. I did want to point out Allison in the chat says, I love the moment when Chakotay finds out Seska was Cardassian. He turns to Tuvok and says, you were working for her. Seska was working for them. Was anyone on the ship working for me? And that was another one of my favorite episodes, which I hadn't talked about. I can't recall the name of it at the top of my head, but I thought that was a great episode too when they revealed who Seska was. But anyway,
how big is the Maquis ship too? It seemed like it was this little tiny ship. But there's like hundreds of them or something.
It's like one of those magical ships that's actually like bottomless. It's like, I think we always used to joke about how everyone was like crammed. I think later compliments, like I think sometime like season 7 or something, they mentioned how there were like something like 50 or 80 Maquis crew members. I'm like, really? You had fucking 80 people packed on that tiny thing?
There was like 6. Just magically producing all these new Maquis.
Anyway,
we can get into the worst or the least favorite.
Okay, episodes. So I'll start out the worst. And my worst episode of season 1, I think it was my top 10 worst of the whole show, was an episode called Ex Post Facto, with Tom Paris getting this wrongfully accused storyline that's a cliche in Star Trek, has been done a billion trillion times before, and they have a really contrived, ridiculous, obvious noir type story pounded into this episode where a woman's smoking, acting like a dame, and she has a fucking dog in the Delta Quadrant. She has a dog. I'm like, why does someone in the Delta Quadrant have a dog? And it's the thing is, it's actually an interesting concept. I think the concept's actually more interesting than the hard time one they did with O'Brien in Deep Space Nine, where the person who's punished, and it makes more sense too. I said the thing in the hard time didn't actually make any sense, but this makes more sense where it actually punishes the victim by making them relive the events of the murder. It's an interesting concept, but what they actually do with it is not interesting at all. It's typical by the numbers cliche and ridiculous how they throw in all the noir things. So this episode actively pisses me off. So yeah, I think this is the worst one of season 1.
So this is actually also my worst. This is one of the 2 that I had picked out. So I only have one more because I only picked out 2, and this was one of them. Yeah, and I had forgotten about the dog. Like, really pissed me off when I first watched it, because that was like reinforced my point about like things could just take place in the Alpha Quadrant. Like, you're all the way on the other side of the galaxy, and they still have freaking dogs. And it's just like they eat dinner, they have 3 meals a day. Like they just couldn't think outside of that human Earth box. It's just, I mean, and that's true of all Star Trek to an extent, but when you're in the Delta Quadrant, you need to start thinking a little more creatively. And I had forgotten about that and how much that pissed me off when I first watched it until I did this rewatch. I was like, oh yeah, this is the one with the dog, the freaking dog. And the other thing I thought when I watched this is like, it seemed like a combination of a matter of perspective and hard times. It was like taking those 2 episodes and combining them, but not being as good as either of them. And I was like, what is this, the Orville now? I mean, we're just ripping off other episodes and combining them, but not doing it as well. I'm watching the Orville now. So, this was also one of my least favorite episodes in season 1. I was going to talk about it too. I did not like this episode either.
Yeah, well, at least we're on the same mind for that. So I guess you just do your next worst, and then maybe I'll just do my next 2 after. But anyway, so what is your next worst episode? Oh, you're muted.
I'm muted, sorry. I hit the mute button. I thought I was unmuting myself, but I was muting myself. So this is where I get into what I teased earlier. Matthew Ross had listed a few episodes, and I was like, one of those is my least favorite, and that's Learning Curve. And this is like, and the reason why I remembered that I wanted to talk about the Maquis and how poorly that was handled is this was like cheap ass attempt to try to say, oh, look, the Maquis are having a hard time integrating into the ship. Look, but they're not really. Like, they're still wearing Starfleet uniforms. They're still following orders. And I think this is the one that you mentioned before. Tuvok was training them, and it was so dumb. Like, Tuvok was a high school basketball coach trying to train them, and I'll give it some credit because it was interesting seeing Tuvok being put in a position that he's not comfortable with, trying to be a motivator. That's not a natural position for him. So that was somewhat interesting from a character perspective for Tuvok. But otherwise, it was just a dumb episode. And again, it's like, but they were on a ship with like 6 people. Where are these people coming from? And then you never see them again unless they at least not as far as I've watched up through the beginning of season 4.
I will say the bowling guy makes a comeback in season 7 for like,
does he?
Yeah. Which is kind of out of the blue, but whatever.
Well, he's blue and he's coming out of the blue. I can make a good joke for that. But it's dumb. Like I thought this was a really stupid episode and very anticlimactic for the finale. Not. And which is typical of other Trek series in the first couple seasons. The finales aren't really true finales. They're just like, that's it. That's the end of the season, huh? So yeah, Learning Curve is one of my least favorite episodes.
I fucking love what Matthew Ross just said. Come on, Alyssa. If they worked well as a team, they could have gone to the finals against the Kazon. Yeah, look, he was making the dude run laps.
And he did it. Like, I would be like, fuck you, Tuvok. I'm Maquis. I'm not running no fucking laps. And he did it.
And I thought I thought that episode was cheesy too at the start where Chakotay just punches that guy. You want to do things Maquis way? I'm like, that sounds dumb. I didn't really buy it.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and he was like full on Starfleet now.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
And but that was actually my third least favorite.
Okay.
That you hit on. So now I only have one left. So I guess I'll get to that, which is my second least favorite of the season. And sure exactly how to pronounce this episode. Is it Catharsis or Catharsis?
Catharsis is a word.
Okay.
But I don't know if that's. I don't know all the titles.
All right, so this is the episode where this being takes over Tuvok's body, and Chakotay's spirit somehow gets loose on the ship, and they think that's the alien taking over people's bodies, but really it's Chakotay trying to protect him from this alien that's taking over Tuvok's body. I thought that episode was terrible.
Doomsday says cathexis in the chat.
Cathexis. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I knew it was something like that. But yeah, that's God, I thought that episode was so damn cheesy, especially the whole Chakotay spirit roaming around the ship and the way he was filmed. Like, ooh, there's Chakotay. They were trying to play it like an alien at first, and then but there was actually another alien that's happening at the same time. Chakotay's spirit's roaming the ship, and the way that like Tuvok, like as soon as they reveal that he's the alien, it's like all of a sudden he's twirling his mustache. My friends are gonna come kill you all. And I just thought it was a terrible episode. Terrible.
Yeah, I don't know. I was more in the mediocre range for me. Like, I see where you're coming from. Like, I don't think it was a good episode either. I guess I just wasn't bothered by it as much as you were. But it's definitely not a good episode by any stretch. But I didn't think of it when I thought of my worst episodes of the season.
Whoa there, Colonel Doomsday. Whoa. So you'd rather watch Beverly Crusher's Nana than
Hey, let's not get too crazy here. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Come on.
Would you rather watch Beverly bang that space ghost? Do not light the candle anyway. Oh my god, nothing's worse than that. Anyway,
Well, there are a couple of episodes that are worse than that.
Not in Next Generation, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Maybe in Star Trek, like Prop and Lace or something.
Yeah.
But anywho, good candle. Fight me. All right, I'll fight you on that. I can't believe you would hate Catharsis worse than that. That's crazy. Anyway, but it was a bad episode, I will say. All right, so any sort of last words on season 1 before we go ahead and move over to season 2?
Yeah, I guess I had forgotten that it started in January, so it was a little shorter. So it was like a little surprise when it was only 15 episodes. A full 11 episodes shorter than the other seasons. Yeah. That was the only other thought I had about season 1.
I mean, I will say, I remember when I first watched season 1, I had no idea that the learning curve was the finale. Like, it didn't seem like a finale. They didn't announce it as a finale, and then the next week it's just like no more new episodes. And I found out the reason for that is actually the first 7 episodes of season 2 were actually filmed to be in season 1, but for some reason they pushed them back to season 2.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And those first episodes are kind of.
Yeah, I didn't remember that. I didn't remember that.
All right. So season 2, I think from our preliminary discussion, it sounds like this is where we're going to have a strong disagreement because season 2 is my 3rd favorite season of Voyager because I think it maintains that, at least better than the later seasons, that level of community ship, and it does have at least some reoccurring elements. It has Hogan, he shows up all the time, and that stupid Kazon spy guy storyline. Hey, at least they had something that was serialized. But and the Kazon story was serialized, even though the Kazon, not really one of the best villains in Star Trek, but some of the stuff they did with them and Seska, I still say that Seska was the best villain of Voyager, particularly because the only other main villain of Voyager was the Borg Queen, and we're gonna wait till later seasons to jump into that. But I actually quite liked Seska, even if I didn't always like the Kazon. And I think, yes, the first part of season 2 did have a rough start. But I think, and it did have some terrible episodes later on too. But I think for the most part, I enjoyed the type of episodes that they were releasing this season better. I think they were sort of kind of almost more original than what they were doing later on in the season. And I think they did do some really great character stuff. So your thoughts on season 3?
Yeah, this is where we disagree. And I just gave I just had my honest first thoughts that came to my head after watching season 2, and I didn't even know what your opinion was until we talked about it a little bit later. You and I had a little conversation about it. I was like, oh, that's what you that's what you think. And I will say I'm only comparing it to seasons 1 and 3 at this point. Perhaps once I get seasons 5 and 7, I will look back at season 2 more fondly and go, oh yeah, Mark was right. They had more community and all of that stuff. But my thoughts on season 2 was it stood out like a sore thumb as easily the worst of the first 3. And I guess I like season 3 a little better than you, because to me it's mediocre. Season 2 has the 2 absolute worst episodes of the first 3 seasons, which we'll talk about when we get to our worst episodes. And I know you agree with me that these are bad episodes, but to me they stood out as far beyond the 2 worst. Yes, they had a couple of recurring, somewhat serialized stories, but they were both stupid. They had 2 of them that involved Tom Paris, one at the beginning of the season and one kind of in the latter part of the season. And the one at the beginning of the season actually started in season 1. And carried over into season 2. And I can see what you're saying about them originally having the beginning of season 2 and season 1, because they had this really stupid storyline where Neelix was jealous of Tom Paris and Kes, and he would always say to Kes, like, "Ooh, I bet you wish you could be with Tom Paris right now." It was so irritating. And I was happy when they ended that storyline. It was, I think, somewhat in the beginning, like maybe episode 6 or something, and also, which is a terrible episode in my opinion, but at least it was over with. They were done with that. And then later in the season, the storyline with the spy who they had to make sure they got him in every episode. Even it was some stupid like B plot, like nothing plot. I can't think of any specific examples, but like some stupid thing happened. I'm just going to make something up, but like, oh, Neelix cooked something that people didn't like in the mess hall. Let me contact the Kazon. Ooh, you gotta hear about this. The Kazon would be like, oh, I'm not going to let you talk to my leader. They had to do that in every episode. I mean, it wasn't quite that extreme, but like there were some like dumb plots that weren't really that great that, oh, let me call my Kazon contact. And then, but they had to make sure they had the spy in. And what was really, really, really stupid was this convoluted plot that Tom Paris had to pretend to be an asshole for a month. And then just so they could get him onto a Kazon ship. And like, I think it's more convoluted than Zemo's plot in Civil War. Like everything had to fall just perfectly in place. Like there was a 1 in a billion chance of that plot ever coming to fruition. And it was so dumb how Tom Paris was like behaving like an asshole for all of these episodes. Sure, it's serialized, but it's stupid. And what was worse was not letting Chakotay in on it. And her excuse, Janeway's excuse was, oh, I needed to be authentic for the spy. What, she didn't trust Chakotay was as good of an actor as Tom Paris? If she trusts Tom Paris to be an actor, wouldn't she think Chakotay could also be an actor? It's crazy not to let your first officer in on that. And the only conclusion you can come to is the one that Chakotay does come to, which is that, oh, why don't you trust me? And he was right to feel that way. But then after this storyline is over, yeah, we're best friends again. And Chakotay admires Janeway and giving Starfleet speeches again. And it's all gone. So if you're going to do that, if you're going to have Janeway not trust Chakotay, then there needs to be lasting effects. And there needs to be a reason, frankly. Chakotay had been super loyal to her. So it made no sense for her not to trust him. That. It was just for contrived plot convenience so that the audience could be fooled into this dumb Tom Paris being an asshole plot. So that whole thing was stupid. And then the Seska thing, I think Seska, this is where you're really going to hate me, because just not hate me, but disagree with me. She reminded me of that green chick in Discovery, like maybe not as bad as that, because there's no scene where she like has to kill off her relative or whatever, but I thought she was a mustache twirly two-dimensional villain, and I knew that storyline was ending at the beginning of season 3, so I was like, okay, that's fine. This will be over with and we can move on. But yeah, and there's another Kazon thing I'll talk about later that I think they could have done that would have been better instead of the Seska thing. But yeah, I felt like season 2 was kind of bad so it like I walked out of it like this is easily the worst.
Well, I did not have as big of an issue with the Jonas storyline or the Tom Paris thing. I didn't even find it that contrived, and I definitely nothing can be as contrived as Civil War. He was fought in Civil War, but Yeah, so I guess that's where we're different. I didn't have that big of an issue. I liked Seska. I thought she worked as a villain. I can see where you're coming from with her being a bit mustache twirly at times, but I think overall you can understand her Cardassian perspective that she wants that they don't have this prime directive and she would want to get home in any means, and she'd see the Kazon as their way of doing it. And I kind of like the way she manipulates them sometimes. And I mean the whole thing about I impregnated myself with your baby, Chakotay. That was stupid. And how they kind of manufactured a relationship with Chakotay. And well, they did that in the first season, but that was out of nowhere. But yeah, and the Michael Jonas thing actually kind of, I mean, I thought it was hilarious what you said about how you had to contact him about irrelevant shit. Yeah, that was kind of dumb. That was funny at times. But I like the idea of having a spy. Okay, Maquis was unhappy with Starfleet and who would be a spy for NC Seska there through. But the way they concluded that storyline with the Neelix doing a fucking Good Morning show was terrible. It was the worst way they could have.
I forgot about that. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Also terrible.
But I don't know. I the good episodes of season 2 I actually really love. So I guess we'll talk about that shortly. But
and just to be clear, there's some good episodes that I liked. And the whole thing is not terrible. Like when we talk about the good episodes, I like them a lot. Just so you know.
Yeah, no, fair enough. But I guess I just didn't. I guess I liked season 2 overall better. The tone of it or whatever. But anyway, before we go any further, I desperately need to pee. So I'm just going to run and do that real quick.
All right. You guys have a couple minutes to ask me anything you want. Because I don't have anybody else to talk to but you guys. So let's look and see what you guys have got in the chat so far. That plot only proves Tuvok was a better XO. That's out of context, so I don't know what you're talking about. They needed the Maquis to rebel on the ship. Yeah, and I think that, like when Mark said it was a good idea, like I think it was a good idea. I think the execution was really dumb. Like I thought they could have. I don't have any problem with the idea that a Maquis would betray them to the Kazon. I think that makes a lot of sense, actually. But the whole thing was stupid. The way he would just contact his Kazon spy just because Neelix, made a bad meal or something, and people were upset about it. That's not what really happened, but it's just dumb things like that. Yeah, and Matthew Ross, I think I heard the sink running, so I think he did wash his hands. J. Kamen 99 asked, "What are your thoughts on the Kazon?" Well, Mark's back, but I'll give my quick thoughts on the Kazon. I didn't love the concept of them, but I do think that there was one episode that I thought that they could have done more with, and they explored it more, which I'll talk about it in a bit. And Mark is back, so we can move on.
Yeah. So the Kazon were not good.
Yeah.
Basically. Anyway, let's see. All right. So you'll start this time with the best, and I'll start this time with the worst. So, what was your favorite?
Which is the same order we did last time, but if that's what you wanted to do.
Is it? No, I thought I started. No, you started with the best. Okay, so I'm started with the best.
Yeah.
With the worst.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I said in my head before I sat down. For some reason, I got it mixed up. All right. So I'm starting with the best. So my favorite episode of season 2 of Voyager is called Deadlock, which is, I believe I named this my second favorite episode of the entire show. This is the episode where their Voyager's duplicated, but not their antimatter is not duplicated, so they're sharing sort of the same source, and you have two crews that are sort of vying together. One of them's like getting the bulk of the damage, so that you see how fucked up they're getting. The whole ship's falling apart. Harry Kim dies, and and you had the two Janeways like meet in person to try to negotiate. I just thought it was amazing. And then they had this to me, this is the singular best Vidian episode. Like I love the way they used the Vidians in this episode, like especially the moment when they come in and they actually start like fucking killing everyone, ripping out the organs. Like I love the music, the way it was shot. I get goosebumps every time I watch this scene. And as I don't know. There's something, and it's probably like my other favorite Voyager episode, which we'll get to in later seasons, Year of Hell. There's something I like about seeing the crew get totally fucked up and the ship totally getting in disaster, and how they sort of come to terms. And it is kind of a fake out where you think the one that's getting totally fucked up and destroyed at the start is the one that's going to die, but it ends up being the other one that was pristine because the Vidians come in and kill them all. And I'm sorry, it was one of the best badass Janeway moments when the Vidians make their way to the bridge and she's like, welcome to the bridge. And it just fucking blows up and blows up their whole ship, which, you know, I've heard some people who really hated this episode because of the science behind it. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but I'm like, who cares? Like, I don't care. It's a great episode. It's really intriguing. It's a great character story. It's a great action story. It's a great suspense story. It's a great doomsday story. It's everything I love about Star Trek in one episode, and I was absolutely, completely blown away by this. It is one of my favorites of the entire franchise. To be perfectly honest, I love this episode.
Okay, well, this episode just proves that I don't think all of season 2 is terrible. This was a great episode. It was actually also my favorite of the season. So if you had not talked about it, I would have. And I don't know about the whole franchise or even the whole series yet, but certainly through the first 3 seasons, it would be one of the best. Even if overall I still thought season 2 was the worst, this was a great one for all of the reasons that you said. And I liked the fake out a lot. I liked how they kind of led you to believe that the one ship was the one that was going to have to destroy itself, but then it ends up being the other one, which was pristine. I loved that, actually. And I had forgotten that because I remembered this episode as I did my rewatch. I was like, oh yeah, this one's cool. But I didn't remember all the details like that. So it was like watching it afresh, like the fake out like got me again. And so that was cool. I was like, oh, cool. And also I love how they have the other Harry Kim and I've forgotten that it's actually the other Naomi Wilder comes over, and it really reminded me of one of my favorite Deep Space Nine episodes. Why am I blanking on it? I listed it as like number 2, Visionary. Yeah, yes. I blanked on the title. It was like number 2 or 3 on my list. Yes. I think I had it at number 3. I love that episode where like the O'Brien is kind of out in the wrong timeline, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of that. And I love that. I love that. I was like the Harry Kim who had like slightly different experiences than the rest of the crew, which is the same thing that happened with O'Brien. And then like that it's actually the baby, the Naomi Wildman that from the other ship because theirs had died. I loved it. I loved this episode. And I actually recently watched I don't know if you've been hip to Trek culture. I've been watching a lot of Trek culture. They do all these different top 10s of all different kinds. And they recently did one top 10 underrated episodes of Star Trek. And their number 1, I totally disagree with because it was Take Me Out to the Holosuite, which is terrible. But
see, I saw that video and I saw the thumbnail of Take Me Out to the Holosuite. So I'm like, I'm not watching this. It's going to be a bullshit list.
Yeah. But they had this one on there. And I was like, really? This is underrated? I thought I would assume everyone would love this.
Oh, episode. It is underrated. It is. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't realize that. I'm just watching it, just purely watching it without any other outside thoughts or anything like that. I assumed, well, this must be one of the best episodes or higher ranked episodes because it's a great episode.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I've heard some people get hung up on the fact, 2 Voyagers couldn't exist side by side and share antimatter. That doesn't make sense. Why are the Vidians destroyed, but the other Voyagers not destroyed? Blah blah blah. I'm like, who cares? It's a great episode. But yeah, some people apparently get really caught up on that.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. I guess some people have different priorities.
Yeah.
But
And I just want to point out in the chat, Doomsday said that there's a shitload of technobabble in season 1. There's a shitload of technobabble all throughout Trek, especially in Deep Space Nine. There's a lot of technobabble. I've gotten to the point where I just sort of tune it out. I'm like, yes, technobabble, whatever. Like, it doesn't bother me like it bothers some people. There are some exceptions where the technobabble goes over the top, but for the most part, like, I'm not bothered by technobabble.
I don't. To be fair, I do think Voyager is the worst when it comes to technobabble.
Yeah.
Personally, but
I thought Deep Space Nine was pretty bad with technobabble.
Really, I thought Deep Space Nine was the least offensive.
Yeah,
I don't know. Like, I don't know. Maybe, especially in the later seasons.
Seems like Dax liked her some technobabble. Dax.
Well, that's true. But yeah, so we agree. This is an amazing episode.
We are in agreement on this, even if we're not in agreement on season 2 as a whole.
All right, so why don't you get to another one of your favorites?
So another one of my favorites is one that I remember from way back in the day that I really liked this episode. I came back to do a rewatch, and I still really like this episode, and that is the Thaw. I remember first watching it thinking that it was really like an original series episode, and I still think that that's the case because it was. I mean, it could have just been filmed in like one of their studios in the 1960s, and like it wasn't elaborate sets, and you didn't really need elaborate sets. And mostly, I think I remember liking it when it first came out is because it was fresh off of Michael McKean's run on Saturday Night Live, and we were watching Saturday Night Live, and so Michael McKean was kind of fresh in my head. And I love him in this episode. The downside is I do think they get a little too heavy on what's the metaphor for fear? I mean, like, let's make this into a fear metaphor. So if there's a reason to not like the episode, it's that. But this might be nostalgia powered, honestly, because I loved that when it first came out. But I still enjoy it quite a lot. So I still there's a place in my heart for this episode still.
And that was my biggest complaint about this episode, the way they're like, fear. Why does one react to fear? But the one thing I fucking love the ending. It was so amazing when they had the hologram fake him out. I
didn't say that, but I love the ending. That was my favorite part.
It's one of the most bad, even though it's not actually Janeway, it's one of the most badass.
Yeah. It was a badass Janeway moment, even if it's not even the real Janeway. It's just badass. I love that ending so much.
I'm afraid I know.
Yeah, that's great.
But of course, we're gonna have a Janeway hologram be a main character of a show coming up. So, but it's funny. This one actually didn't make my favorite list of season 3. I think it would have been like 4 or 5, maybe 5 on my list. So it didn't make my top 3. The funny thing about this episode is it actually took convincing for me to like this episode, because at first I kind of thought, I didn't think much of it. I kind of thought it was a bit silly with a bunch of clowns going, "Oh, we're scaring you," and I had to take like comments from people actually saying, "Oh, this is one of the best episodes of season 2." And I think it was years since I've seen it. I was like, "Are you sure?" And I went back and watched it. And I was like, actually, you're right. This actually is a really good episode. It is a really effective episode. And I know you haven't seen Better Call Saul yet, but for me, seeing Michael McKean in Better Call Saul, where he does an amazing performance, then watching him here makes me appreciate him even more. And how he just, I mean, again, it's kind of ridiculous that they have clowns in the Delta Quadrant, but that's Voyager for you. I think, and also how we gotta save this whole planet. There's like 3 people, but yeah, it is an effectively like really creepy episode, and again, as we said, that ending was completely badass.
Yeah, one of the creepiest episodes for me in all of Star Trek, in a good way. There are some that are try to be creepy that I just don't think work, but this is a creepy in a good way episode.
All right, so now let me get to my second favorite episode of season 2, which I have a feeling you may not. You probably would just call it mediocre, but it's always been one of my favorites. I think it's really emotional, brings me to tears sometimes. It's an episode called Resistance, where Janeway is like the ship. And this is, again, I remember praising this episode for the fact that the ship runs out of power and they need to. This is something in later seasons, like it just magically recharges itself and they magically get supplies out of nowhere. But they were like dead in the water. They had no supplies, so they had to barter with this planet where there was an authoritarian government, and so they had to deal with this resistance. And they got caught up in the politics, and Tuvok and B'Elanna got imprisoned and tortured. It's a really dark episode. Someone mentioned before that Voyager is always at its best when it's dark, and I agree, and that's part of the reason why I love this episode. But to me, the most touching part, and it's funny because, again, when I first saw this as a teenager, I thought that old guy, I didn't really like this episode. I thought that old guy was just annoying, but now I feel like his story was like, it's so touching. The actor did an amazing performance playing someone who was, you thought was just an insane little kook, but who had actually like suffered through the loss of his wife and his daughter, who both died at the hands of this authoritarian government, in the way that the authoritarian guy was just like taunting him, oh, blah blah, you're just a pathetic little man, and how he saved Janeway's life, and Janeway granted him, because the whole time he thought Janeway was her daughter. I was like, what are you, stupid, crazy old man? But at the end, she's like, yes, I am your daughter and I forgive you. Like, that brings me to tears. I think that's an extremely touching episode, and I personally I think this is in my top 20, and maybe even top 10 Voyager episodes. I love it.
Yeah, I'll be honest, it took me a little while to even think of what episode you were talking about, and then you started talking about that old man who was, you think he's a crazy kook, and then and I was like, oh yeah, okay, that one. The dude who thought Janeway was his daughter. Okay, I know what you're talking about now. Yeah, this episode was okay for me. I don't know. I was bored with it, honestly. You make some good points about it. Especially with this, I like the story with the old man, that he wasn't just a crazy kook. I thought that was done nicely. I don't know. This episode just didn't really like do it for me. It was. Yeah, you're right. I am gonna say it's mediocre. It's okay for me. It wasn't one of my favorite. But yeah, but you make good points. I mean, I can see where you're coming from there.
I just want to address Colonel Doomsday said that telling me that clown stranded them in the Delta Quadrant. It wasn't a clown, it was a banjo man. Anyway. And Matthew Ross says it's a good episode. Didn't want to know where his hat is. That's right. He kept saying, "Where's my heart?" It was just the way of him being goofy. I don't know. Yeah, it took me a while to get into this episode. Like, I didn't like it at first, but now it's like I love it to death. I think it's extremely powerful. And it's funny because this episode was written by a couple of writers who used to be like, who would write Star Trek novels. Like, they were Star Trek novelists, and somehow they transitioned. I think they went on to work for Enterprise too, but they just wrote 1 or 2 episodes for this. Oh, you're referring to Janeway as being the clown. Janeway's not a clown. Whatever. But yeah. I don't know.
Janeway's not a clown.
I love this episode. But anyway, so what's another one of your favorites?
So this one might surprise you, and might surprise some others, but I'm going to point it out because I think this would have been the better way to go with the Kazon. And that's alliances, because I liked this concept that there were all these different factions of Kazon, and it could have made it a way for the Kazon to be really relevant. and not just. I have a lot of problems with the case, particularly how they're like. We haven't gotten to talk about this yet before, but particularly like how in the beginning of season 1 they're like, "Oh, you're magically creating things out of air, but you have fucking warp drive." I mean, come on, you can't be that surprised by it. So the Kazon as a concept, not the best. But I did actually like this episode because I liked this idea of, like, again, like they could have gone through space a while like this, as Mark, as you talked about in Deadlock and Year of Hell, where they could have really just been constantly under attack by all these different factions and like trying to make. I like the idea of Janeway trying to go out and make a peace or make a deal with one of the factions to try to get involved in the conflict and like kind of team up with some of the Kazon. Like if that had been an ongoing thing, I would have liked that better than the stupid spy thing. I would have liked that better than the Siska thing. But that's just me. I would have preferred that kind of story because you could have really gotten into Voyager constantly being attacked and getting into a little bit of Year in Hell-ish stuff where, and it makes the Kazon relevant. So I enjoyed this episode and wish they had expanded it more, made it serialized.
I agree, actually. This isn't one of my top picks, but I do really like this episode. I think it made my top 50 at the least. I think would you say you would give this like an 8 out of 10?
Maybe a 9. Yeah, 8, probably 8. I don't know. You're putting me on the spot. I hadn't really thought about it.
I'd give it an 8.
Yeah.
So I really like this episode for all the reasons you mentioned. It's funny because I watched this review of this guy who despised this episode. He considered it as one of the worst of the entire show. And mainly because of the fact that it wasn't serialized, because of the fact that they didn't have them have to make an alliance and they kind of just wiped it under the rug and started from scratch at the end. And I agree, like I didn't like that. And I think it would have been way more interesting had they kept it going, had they were forced to make an alliance with one of the Kazon factions. But it doesn't make it a terrible episode. It's still a good episode, even if it is singular and they don't keep it going for longer like they should. It's still like what they should have been doing. Like I agree, like the whole sort of thing about them constantly getting their asses kicked with the Kazon to the point where they realize they have to bend some of their lores. And I love the character interactions, the way that Tuvok has to talk Janeway into that. And how like sort of what's his face Maj Kohler's too much of a prideful asshole and like sort of puts him off. I thought it was great. I did really like this episode.
Yeah, and it really pushes Janeway on her insistence. No, we have to stick by Starfleet values, and this was the first real test for her on that. Really pushed her like, well, are you just going to die on Starfleet values? Maybe you got to stretch that a little bit. And it was a very interesting debate. I thought there was no clear correct answer in that debate. I thought it was a very interesting debate. And I liked how it really pushed Janeway to forcing her to think about, maybe we have to bend the Federation rules a little bit in this situation because it's a very unique situation. So I really liked that aspect of it.
I just want to point out in the chat, Matthew Ross says to Colonel Doomsday about Janeway being a clown, that Janeway is fine. She will have to space you for your attitude, Colonel Doomsday. But, that's season 6 Janeway. We haven't gotten there. We're still at season 1, 2, and 3.
I'm not looking forward to this. That was one of the things you said in your review that alarmed me, like the Janeway's going to change character. And I don't really remember that, and I'm not looking forward to watching that.
All right, so we both did 2 best episodes of season 2, but I just want to throw out an honorable mention that wasn't mentioned at my 3rd favorite, and just really curious, really quickly, what you thought of this episode. The episode Life Science, where the doctor meets the Vidian and sort of forms a romance with it. That's probably, I named this recently as like one of my, when I did my top 10 romance episodes, this was number 1. This was my favorite romance episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. I thought it had a lot of strong commentary on beauty and stuff like that, so I absolutely loved it. just really curious what you thought of it.
Yeah, I liked it. I think I don't love romance episodes in Star Trek in general. I think the best romances are romances that take place in episodes that aren't about the romance, such as Yesterday's Enterprise. I thought that was a really well done romance. And there's another one I can't think of right off the top of my head. But so in general, I'm not a fan of episodes that focus on romance, but I thought it was a good character episode for the Doctor. So it's a solid episode. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite, but I would say it's pretty solid.
I do think it's the first really good Doctor episode.
Yeah, I can go along with that. It just doesn't make my worst list, I don't think, but I don't like the one where he has a family in season 3.
That nearly made my worst list.
Yeah, it didn't quite make my worst list. I don't think I put that one on there. I think I left it off, but I don't like that one. But this one is definitely one of the better Doctor episodes for sure.
All right. Speaking of worst, let's get into the worst, and I'll say this time you would start off with the worst episode of season 2. So knock me. What is it?
All right. So which one of the two am I gonna go with? There are two that I think are so bad.
Is it the same two that I'm thinking of?
Probably. But I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna go with Threshold. This is like the dumbest freaking concept. Like you go above warp 10 and turn into salamanders, but it wasn't like you just turn into salamanders. Like you evolve into salamanders, which makes no sense. The human race is not going to evolve into salamanders. That's stupid. And we're going to talk about whatever episode we were talking about with the science. The people are complaining about the science. There's absolutely science is thrown completely out the window. And this is just like gobbledygook and make believe. This is garbage, and goes against established canon because they have gone above warp 10 before. Now, granted, some of that was in the original series. In the original series, you have to take with a grain of salt because sometimes they would go into the center of the galaxy or whatever. So was that really established what the galaxy was like back then? So when they go above warp 10, then it's not the same thing. But like in why am I blanking on the name of it again? In All Good Things. In the future timeline, Riker says, let's go to warp 13. And yes, I know that's an alternate future or whatever. And they seem to have disregarded that, but they had established before that you can go beyond warp 10 and it's not a big deal. And I really, really, really want Discovery or Picard or even Lower Decks to just like completely eradicate this from canon. I would love to see Discovery, now that they're in the future, like regularly go warp 12 and nobody turns into salamanders, and we can just completely eradicate this episode from canon because it's so stupid.
Actually, I'm gonna disagree with you slightly there. I would actually, just not to mention Lower Decks, I think I would love it if Lower Decks did a stupid thing that completely made fun of this episode.
I do want that. I definitely want Lower Decks to make fun of this episode.
Actually, I think someone pointed out, the episode where he got deformed, someone said that there was a salamander thing that was supposed to be the one from Threshold, like on the ship with him.
But Doomsday, I'm sorry. Doomsday brings up a good point about they go faster than warp 10. I think the spore drive is not warp. So I don't know if that counts as warp.
No, it's something different.
It's something different entirely.
Unless he's talking about season 3. Maybe they mention when they went into the future? Are they going faster in warp 10?
I don't know. They might, but I would like them to. I would like them to just go faster than warp 10 and just nobody turns into salamanders. And I also want Lower Decks to make fun of it. I really want to see a Lower Decks parody where like they go faster and warp 10 and a salamander comes out. And Mariner's just like, oh, that's my pet salamander or whatever. Or I don't know. Like, I want to see Lower Decks mock this episode because it deserves to be mocked. It is so very stupid, and it is I think the least scientific episode of all of Star Trek, and that they stretch the bounds of science a lot, but this was just like gobbledygook.
And to be fair, the Brennan Braga who wrote this episode has come out and apologized for it. Like his DVD featurette, he talked about, yes, this is the worst episode. We totally messed up here. But honestly, when I did my top 10 worst Voyager, this made my top 10, but it didn't make my top 5. And most people would be appalled by that because most people consider it easily the number 1 worst episode of the entire show. But I mean, don't get me wrong. I still think that Salamander ending is one of the craziest, most bullshit. Like, have you said,
what happens to their baby?
It's like the ending made me think more of like, what the hell were they smoking when they wrote this episode? I was like, it wasn't weed. It was definitely harder than that. Like, yeah, man, they turn into salamanders.
Not any drug I ever want to do. That's for damn sure.
But here's the thing, and this is why I wouldn't say this is the singular worst episode of Voyager, is before we get to that ending, I think it's kind of just an average kind of bad. I mean, the concept of going fast in Warp 10 is dumb, but when like Paris is just mutating and he's calling, oh, pepperoni pizza, like it's like, it's silly, but it's not like terrible until you get to that ending. And once you get to the ending, you're just like, what? So I think the bulk of the episode is just boring until we get to the end. But yeah,
I can't speak to where it falls in my overall Voyager top 10 worst list because I haven't gotten there yet. But it is actually, to me, equal to another one that in this season that we probably will get to shortly. It's hard for me to say which one I like less. So I don't know that I can't speak to that yet until I watch the entire series. But it certainly for the first 3 seasons is one of the worst.
But okay, so let me get into my worst, which actually the threshold is my second worst of season 2. I'll get into my absolute worst of season 2, which I'm curious if it's the episode you were speaking of, an episode called Tuvix.
Ding 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 ding.
Yep.
Yes, this is like, to me, they're both. It was hard to pick out which one I like less.
See, the frustrating thing about this episode is that a sizable fan base, group of the Voyager fan base, love this episode and think it's one of the best of the show, which perplexes me to no end. And when I made a review of this and I trashed this episode, I gave it a 1, called it one of the worst episodes of the show. I got so many people who were pissed off, arguing with me, saying I don't appreciate good storytelling and whatnot. I'm like, but how could you like this episode? Like, to me, have you ever seen the Adam Sandler movie Click?
I did not bother with that one.
Yeah, which is a good call. So, and it starts off as a very typical Adam Sandler goofy, dumb movie until it gets to the end, and all of a sudden it turns into a melodrama where like he fast forward through his whole life, and they were playing like serious with this over the top melodrama music, going, "No, I ruined my life." I'm like, what the hell are you doing? This was a silly comedy. Why are you turning it to a melodrama? That's exactly what I feel like about Tuvix. Like, this is this concept, and I heard that the writers originally wanted to make it as a comedy, but for someone had the smart idea to turn this into a stupid over-the-top melodrama where this guy is going around the ship going, "I want to live," and it's just a ridiculous concept of like combining Tuvok and Neelix, and God damn it, I hate this episode so much. It's gotten, actually, it was so bad on my channel at one point, the people arguing with me over this episode, at one point I refused to talk about it. Like, one time I did my Voyager season review, I'm like, okay, next episode is Tuvix, I hate it, move on. like I got sick of people arguing with me about it because I can't understand how people could love this episode so much when I think it's shit. Anyway. Anyway, any more thoughts on this?
Yeah, I have quite a few thoughts on this episode. This episode pisses me off. But first, to address like how people could think it's good, I think without getting too detailed, there's a show I watched recently that I kind of mentioned to you called The Nevers, and I hated it. I hated the ending, and it was just very poorly done. But it could have been good, and I think when I like looked on Rotten Tomatoes and I saw positive reviews, I was like, oh, those people were just projecting onto it like what they were trying to do and acting as if they accomplished it. So maybe that's what people are doing with Tuvix, because I think they were trying to create this dilemma. And I rewatched your review on that, and you pointed out a couple of good episodes where they did that well. And so I think people saw like what they're trying to do and projected goodness into it, even though it was a complete failure. What pissed me off most about this episode is that Tuvix is a narcissistic, conceited, self-centered asshole. Like, he does not give a shit about anybody else but himself. And where does this come from? Because he's supposedly a combination of Tuvok and Neelix, and neither one of them are like that. And Janeway even points that out, that both Neelix and Tuvok would give their lives for the crew. She says that, and she is correct. So why is Tuvix all of a sudden like does not give a shit about anybody else? He's been alive for 2 weeks, dude. You've been around for 2 weeks, and he and his conceited, arrogant head thinks that makes him superior to people who've been Tuvok for 100 years. Neelix has lived a full life. They have people who love them. Who gives a shit about Kes? I don't fucking care about Kes and how much she loves Neelix and how much she misses him, or Tuvok's family, assuming he ever gets back to the Alpha Quadrant. Imagine like Tuvok shows up to Tuvok's family, like they'd be like, what the fuck? Like, he doesn't give a crap about any of that. And Janeway points out or he says, like, Janeway points out to him, we gotta, it's not just you, we gotta think about Tuvok and Neelix being dead. And he's like, oh no, they're still alive in me. And Janeway rightfully says it's not the same thing. It is totally not the same thing. And he's a complete asshole for saying that and not giving a shit about Tuvok, Neelix, or anyone who loved and cared about them. And where this trait comes from, when neither Tuvok and Neelix had this trait, where it comes from, the writers. It is contrived. It is completely contrived to try to give you to give a shit about this character you should not care about, because he's a narcissistic, self-centered asshole. He deserves to die, quite honestly. So this episode pissed me off, and I always hated this episode. And I do remember other people in the past like loving this episode, and I'm thinking they're freaking insane, because I've always hated this episode, and rewatching it now just pissed me off.
Yeah, there's been so many videos like recently of people like analyzing the philosophical merit of this episode, and mainly talking about was Janeway in the wrong for murdering Tuvix, and everyone's like, well, of course she was. So, and a lot of people like hold this against her and say she's a murderer. But to me, this is all bullshit, contrived writing. So I don't consider any of this valid. Like, I consider the whole episode invalid, because they is exactly what you said. They're trying to do something and they fail miserably at it, and so people were kind of projecting like what they were trying to do and saying and trying to want to like this episode for being great for what they tried to do, and not noticing just how utterly they failed at it. The episode similitude from Enterprises, when they fucking hit the nail on the head. They do this concept perfect. Like, they do it exactly right. They make it make total sense. They make it make sense for the character. You buy why the Sim kind of wants to save himself. But, not to give away too many spoilers from that episode, but he doesn't go through with it because he's essentially Tucker and he knows not to be fucking asshole like that. And, which is what you just said, which was why, if there's Tuvok and Neelix, why is he being such a selfish prick? So it's like, and why is he forcing Janeway to do this thing where it's obvious they shouldn't? And honestly, I feel like they should have. And speaking of another episode, Riddles, when I did this review, I went on like a 10-minute rant about Tuvix just when I was talking about Riddles, because that's how this episode should have went. It should have been like a surgery that he didn't want to overcome, and he had to be talked down to it, just like the new Tuvox had to be in Riddles. And I thought that would have made perfect sense. I would have been okay with that. But for him going like, I want to live, why are you killing me? I'm like, what the fuck is up with this over-the-top bullshit melodrama?
Completely unearned, and just completely contrived and forced, trying to force that down our throats. And I reject it because it's bullshit.
All right. Allison says, I randomly came across this one when I was at my mom's house for the weekend a month or two ago. We watched the beginning and had to explain the concept, but we were laughing at the song. Oh, my God. Oh, are you talking? Oh, no, she's not talking about Tuvix. She's talking about Tinker Tenure Dr. Spy. Sorry. Because Scooter asked if we like that episode. That's season 5. We haven't gotten there yet, but I personally think it's one of the funniest episodes of Voyager. I'm sure Alyssa hasn't gotten
You think it's one of the what?
Funniest episodes of Voyager.
Oh, okay.
Tinker Tenure Dr. Spy.
Yeah, I don't remember that one, so we'll see when I get to it.
Yeah. Anywho, I think we ranted about that one enough. God, for some reason, I was worried you might not hate this episode as much as me.
No, I don't know if you remember it, but I always hate this episode. Like maybe you don't remember, but from the beginning, I've always hated this.
Yeah, Alice, I picked up on that one. Tinker Tenure Dr. Spy, not too. Anyway, so let us get into the next worst one. It's your turn, right?
No, I just did Tuvix. No, you did Tuvix. You're right. It is my turn. You did Tuvix.
You did Threshold. I did Tuvix. Yeah.
Okay. So my next least favorite, which I don't think is as bad as either of those two, but I don't know how to pronounce it. Parturian or Partrusian or Parturian or something. I don't know how to pronounce it. Yeah, because as I mentioned earlier, the whole concept of the whole reoccurring storyline of Neelix being jealous of Tom Paris and Kes was just dumb, and this episode was about that. Like, let's just make an episode about that. And I don't know, the episode where they come together where there's a baby, whatever, I don't remember, but I don't know. I was so sappy and stupid. And the only bright side of this episode is that storyline is now over. I don't have to deal with this stupid Neelix going around going, "Ooh, you would rather be with Tom Paris, wouldn't you?" Like, it's just so dumb. And so I just hated that storyline, and I did not enjoy this episode. But I was happy when it was over because that meant that storyline is done. So that's the only positive I have about this episode.
Yeah, this didn't make my worst list, but it's close to it. It would be in definitely the 5 of season 2. It's the thing I did a whole video talking about Neelix, where I feel like Neelix is hit or miss to me. Some people despise him as a character, where I think he can be done right sometimes. Like Jatrell, I think, is a great example of that, and it can be done totally wrong. And the whole storyline with him being jealous of Tom Paris is totally an example of that. And I think it just depends on certain writers maybe knew how to handle him better than other writers, and whatever writers were writing this stupid storyline about him being jealous, especially in this episode where he beats the crap out of him and overly protective of Kes, that was terrible. I absolutely hated that. But I suppose the one thing that kind of saves this episode for me is I did kind of like the ending where Tom and Neelix like bonded over helping this alien child. Like I bought that like a smidgen, so I'd maybe gave this episode a 2 instead of a 1 because of that. But it's still an absolutely terrible episode.
All right.
So that didn't do. Yeah, so you're giving a thumbs down. That didn't do it for you.
Yeah. So we've been at it 2 hours and we still haven't gotten to season 3. So did you have other like bad episodes you wanted to talk about? Like,
all right, so real quick. Oh, we've been 2 hours already? Oh, yeah, 45 shit. All right. I shouldn't realize we'd be in bed. Are you on a time crunch or?
No, I just don't like doing videos for 3 hours.
No, definitely not more than 2.5, but we'll try to keep it down from that. But anyway, yeah, so my other worst one for season 2 was actually Initiations. The episode with Nog as a Kazon.
I know, I was like, that's wrong.
Yeah, and I was like, that's like the worst thing. It was not bad enough to have now. You have to make him a Kazon. Like Kazon's the whole time it was annoying as fuck the way that he kept trying, I'm gonna prove myself to you and like capturing Chakotay. And that Chakotay actually like nearly sacrificed himself in order to help this kid. I'm like, why are you doing that? It's just an annoying little rat. Like, I don't know. Nothing about that episode I liked. I thought it was. I would say this is the singular worst Kazon episode of the entire show.
I don't disagree with that statement. I also thought it was pretty bad. Yeah, the one that I just talked about beat this one out just because I really wanted to talk about that stupid Neelix and Tom Paris storyline. But this was also one I considered. I also hated this episode, and it just drove me crazy that they had Nog as a Kazon. Because, I mean, sure, you can have your Jeffrey Combs, and you can have the other guy we talked. I don't remember his name, but the guy we had mentioned earlier. All these reoccurring people, but you can't take one of the main characters from another show. And he did. I mean, he wasn't the title, like he wasn't on the opening credits, but Jake Sisko was, and he was in it as often as Jake Sisko in the first couple seasons because they were in it together all the time. So he was a pretty big character. It was too big, in my opinion, to be recast in another show. Like, you're not going to put Michael Dorn in as another character, or you're not going to put, Patrick Stewart is another character, and that's exaggeration. As Nog is not as Aaron Eisenberg isn't as big as that, but
they put Odo in Enterprise for an episode.
Yeah, did they?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. And the funny thing about that, it was the episode that was exactly ripping off an episode from Deep Space Nine that he was in. You wait till you get to that one.
I probably won't love that either. Because I don't think that was a good idea to take Nog and recast him. And then the way that they recast him was terrible. It's a terrible character. And you're right. He was just an obnoxious brat. Like, why would Chakotay sacrifice himself for this kid? I didn't buy their bond. Like, it just seemed like Chakotay trying to go out of his way to be nice to this kid for no reason. He didn't deserve it. So, yeah, I agree. Very bad episode.
All right, so let's go ahead and move on to season 3 then. So let me give my thoughts on season 3 first. So when I did my countdown of I ranked every single season of Star Trek from worst to best. I think worst I had the first 2 seasons of Enterprise and the first 2 seasons of if I remember correctly, it was the first 2 seasons of Enterprise, then season 3 of Voyager, then the first 2 seasons of Next Generation. I despise season 3 of Voyager. I think it's very clearly the worst season of Voyager. I think it's one of the worst of the entire show. Now, to be fair, I think it improves towards the end particularly has one of the best episodes of the entire show as its finale. I gotta admit that. And it has a few good episodes towards the final stretch, and I could tell that they finally pulled their shit together in the final stretch. But I think the interesting thing to talk about with behind the scenes with season 3 is that they basically fired Michael Piller, who was the showrunner of season 1 and 2, and he had this long-term plan to continue the storyline with Seska and Nikazan and Chakotay's son, and at the last second, they decided to just fire him and scrap that. And apparently, the actress who played Seska was told while she was filming the episode that they were going to kill her off. They told her shortly before they filmed her scene. And, I don't think it's a terrible idea to get rid of the case. I personally think that they should have kept Seska on Voyager in 86 to Kazan. I would have preferred that personally. But regardless, I think what was evident to me for especially the first half of season 3, is that since they changed direction so drastically, so suddenly, that they didn't know what the fuck they were doing, and they were cobbling together stories at the last minute, and they were doing a terrible job at it, and they lost all sense of continuity, all sense of community, and they were trying to rework and rewrite the show and the characters, and they were doing a terrible job. I think they ruined Kessa's character. They turned her into a sex object this season, and lost everything about that character that made her great, to the point when they got rid of her, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. They should get rid of her because it completely ruined her. And I just think there's so many episodes in this I think are like this. What you were saying about season 2 is what I would say about season 3. There's so many episodes in it I think are terrible, absolutely incredible. Like when I was going through my top 20 worst list, there were so many season 3 episodes in that because I think they really mishandled it. And I think one of my best episodes of season 3 is in the first half of season 3, but that's only because they took a script from Next Generation that was already finished and just reworked it for Voyager. That's the only reason why they managed to have one good episode in the first half, because everything else was just being written at the last second, and they had no idea what the fuck they were doing. But anyway, your thoughts on season 3 of Voyager?
Yeah, season 2 still stands out as the worst. I kind of equate season 3 and 1. Honestly, they're mediocre. I'm very curious to hear what your bad episodes are, because they're definitely, I have some bad ones picked out, but they aren't as bad as Tuvix or Threshold to me, or even Partrurian or whatever, how you pronounce that.
To be fair, like Tuvix and Threshold are a special kind of bad, to be sure.
Yeah,
but to me, they're more standouts of season 2, whereas the bad episodes of season 3, I think, are indicative of season 3.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see what you say they are, because I can't even guess, because I think there's a lot of mediocrity in season 3, honestly. So to me, it's just very spectacularly mediocre, and but it has that finale, which you almost can almost is sort of season 4 because Scorpions Part 1 and 2 are among the best all-time Star Trek episodes for me personally. So they are they're going to be up there when I do my final top 10 Voyager. I mean, Year of Hell will certainly be up there, but Scorpion to me, and I guess when we talk about the good and the bad episodes, I will be talking about that one. Other than that, it was a lot of mediocrity. That is for sure. If I were to pick like my favorite episodes of these first 3 that I rewatched, that would be the first one, and the second one would probably be jumping into season 2, which I didn't like overall, which would be Deadlock, would probably be my second favorite. So because then the other ones I picked besides Scorpion are like mediocre, but like slightly better than some of the other ones. But when I was looking at bad ones, I was like, yeah, these aren't great, but I've seen worse. That's how I feel about season 3. So yeah, let's.
I honestly think like half the episodes of season 3 made my top 30 worst list.
Yeah, I don't know when I do a worst list. We'll see what seasons 4 through 7 bring, but I'm not sure if any of these would make my top. I don't know how many I'll do. Probably.
See,
10.
That's the thing. You're worried about what I'm saying about seasons 5 through 7, but bear in mind, I think season 3 is worse than any of those.
Yeah, I think season 3 is just very mediocre. I would put it on par with season 1, and season 2 to me is the worst of the 3.
All right, so I'm starting with the best, and you're starting with the worst this time. That's what I said. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't matter however you want to do it. Go ahead.
Right, so I'll start with the best, and I will say Scorpion. Scorpion Part 1 or whatever, because it counts. It's Part 1.
Yeah, it counts. It counts.
So I think it's very clearly the best, and it's funny because this is my second best. We're both like in my top sort of 10 and 20, but if to find my third best, I had to go like way after like my top 70. So it's basically my, these two are the only ones I think are the really, really great ones. But yeah, Scorpion, of course, an amazing episode. I do still wish they went with the whole full year of hell as the season 3 finale. But I think, and of course, eventually when they do the Borg to death in the later seasons, it's a detriment. But they started off good. And I think this is actually one of my. I think I called this my favorite Borg episode of the entire Star Trek franchise. I absolutely loved it to death. I think I love the feud between Janeway and Chakotay. I think they take most full advantage of their relationship in this episode from the entire show. The introduction of the species 8472 was done absolutely brilliantly. They were terrifying. I mean, granted, they really fucked them up in later seasons too, but the way they handled them here was absolutely brilliant. And apparently they had always intended to introduce 7 of 9, but they didn't want to try to cast her at the end of season 3. They wanted to wait and do it over the summer, which is why she didn't appear in season 4, which makes a lot of sense. And I think it's still, honestly, the 2-part actually flows smoothly, even though she's not in the first part. And that's really an attribute to just how great this episode actually works. Anyway, your thoughts on that? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I was just trying to respond to Doomsday in the chat.
Oh, right.
And I didn't complete my sentence. But anyways, so yeah, I think that the scene between Chakotay and Janeway, the Scorpion scene, is one of, if not one of the best like dialogue scenes in all of Star Trek. It is so good because you can kind of see both their points of view. Like they're both kind of right. I see where they're both coming from, and you're right. This is really the epitome of Janeway and Chakotay's relationship. This was when it was at its best, and yeah, and the introduction, I could just repeat a lot of things you said. The introduction of species 8742 or 8472, and I just remember loving that reveal. We're like, oh, the Northwest Passage. Oh, look at the Northwest Passage, and it's like all the species 8472 ships. So good. Everything about this episode is just absolute gold, and carries on into season 4, which we're not talking about. I also liked part 2, but great episode, and I think to me stands out above and beyond anything else in the first 3 seasons, in my opinion.
I'm totally there. Absolutely agree. But anyway, why don't you get into your next favorite one of season 3?
Okay, so then after this, it gets mediocre, honestly. Like, I don't think anything else is truly great in season 3. I also don't think anything else is really terrible in season 3. So the next one I'm going to go to is one that I didn't like that much when I first saw it. I thought it was overrated. I remember people talking about how good it was. I was like, And I actually rewatched it and I was like, yeah, I like this episode. I like it. And that's Distant Origin. I thought I used to think that the dinosaur thing was dumb, and but you know what? I did enjoy this episode. I do still have a hard time like they seem to be. It sounds like they're implying that the dinosaurs were warp capable before the asteroid came and killed them off, which I don't buy. There's no evidence of that. I mean, that's really a stretch. But it's just kind of like, okay, we'll suspend disbelief because it is an interesting concept that it reminds you that humans have not always been the rulers of Earth, have not always been the dominant species, that there was a species before us. So I think this concept that they have moved on to another part of the galaxy and evolved to a more advanced species, I find that to be very interesting. Now, another suspension of disbelief was that, oh, we're all scientific and everything, and yet we have this doctrine, which I found that a little odd for a species that's supposedly so much more advanced, but they still have the Bible or whatever. They don't call it that, call it the doctrine. Another suspension of disbelief, but putting that aside, I actually did really like the concept of having this character who is a good character. It's so far too many times in Star Trek they meet these people and they end up, screwing them over. And this is a guy who actually sacrificed his beliefs, like just to save Voyager. Like, is a thing that he really, really resisted the whole episode. He was never going to ever give in. But once Voyager was on the line, he's like, "Oh, I can't do that to them," and he did it. And I love Chakotay in there, and I like that it didn't end. It didn't necessarily have like a happy, joy ending, but it was like an optimistic ending. Okay, maybe one day when they're ready. And it would have been interesting to see this species reappear. I don't know. Did they ever do? I don't recall if they ever did. Like, it might have been interesting to like try to expand on them a little bit, but they don't. But yeah, I actually like this episode a lot more than I remember liking it when I first saw it.
Well, part of the reason that they never reappear kind of makes me think a little bit less of this episode, to be honest. It's like, well, what's the point? And that's kind of the disconnect of season 3. But to be fair, I did like this episode too. It's not quite one of my favorite. It didn't make my top 3 of season 3, but I agree. I didn't like it as much at first, but then it grew on me. And I did think I love the continuity in this episode. I love how it begins with the aliens tracking down like Hogan's bones and whatnot, and the space station Neelix was in and stuff like that. I think, the writers had to fight Rick Berman and the producers to allow them to do that because they're just so opposed to any sort of continuity or serialization in the show. And it's interesting that it took it totally from the aliens' perspective, and it was a while before we actually met the Voyager crew. I thought that was a really interesting way to do it, but at the same time, it partly alienates me from the episode a little bit. And like the whole like nature reserve thing where they're like posing, oh, we're in disguise, look at these primitive thing. I got a bit sick of that. Like that was a bit grating, but ultimately, yeah, I did think it was actually a really good episode.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say on it.
Cool. So all right. Yep.
Move on.
So my pick, my second favorite episode of season 3, which is the episode I loved. I thought it's one of my favorites. It was in my top 10 Voyager episodes. It's the only other one from season 3 I think is the top notch. And it's the episode I was referring to earlier that was originally written as a Next Generation script. It's called Remember, with B'Elanna Torres having these dreams that are apparently just memories from a visiting alien race that they find out was responsible for committing genocide against a race in their planet because they were basically germophobes and whatnot, and they tried to uncover this fact. I thought this was extremely powerful episode. It's funny because this was originally written as a season 5 Next Generation episode, but they wouldn't do it because they thought, oh, Schindler's List just came out and we don't want to have a Holocaust analogy too close to Schindler's List. But I actually don't see it as a Holocaust analogy. I see it as having more to do with propaganda. It has more to do with denial, and to the point of denying the fact that they committed genocide, and they try to play it off. Oh, they just went to a different colony where they all died because they're too stinky and they don't clean. And decades after the fact, when they try to covering this up, and how they had to sneak this information to B'Elanna through telepathic dreams. Like, that was a really powerful episode to me. And the funny thing is because originally it was supposed to be Troy, and I can only imagine what this episode would be like if it was Troy. And I think in my mind, it works so much better as B'Elanna, because it's to me is a lot more powerful that she's more temper and more sort of, I could just imagine Troy just being like, ooh, all stupid and Troy like. To me, it works better that B'Elanna was like completely fed up with it and sympathize, and it was more of a stretch for her to try to relate to these aliens that were invading her thoughts, because at first she was like appalled that someone was feeding her these thoughts until she realized like exactly what they were doing. So I had that one dude who's a great actor, the dude from the X-Men, who played a really despicable, like the father figure, whatever. It was amazing. So I love this episode.
Sorry, I was just trying to actually real quick look up. There is a season 5 episode where I think of Next Generation where I think they must have reworked it like from this original plot, because watching the species were like reminded, those are just like those dudes on Next Generation. Like, it reminded me of it a lot. And Counselor Troy was the lead character in that episode, but it's the dude who, like, he ends up like mentally raping people or something.
Yeah, the violation. Yeah, the whole group reminded me of that as well.
Violation. So when you mentioned that, I was like, yeah, Violations is it. I wonder if that was supposed to be this originally, and they went off in that direction instead, because it did have Counselor Troy and those dudes. Like, it's like, I remember those dudes in Next Generation. It was like they reminded me of them a lot. They seemed like the same species. So yeah, and this episode is definitely better than that one. I did not really like that one, Violations. This was a good episode for me as well. I thought this was a pretty strong episode for all the reasons that you said. That it made it as it's very powerful message about wiping out one's dark history, which some countries are doing. I'm not going to name any, but and trying to fight, teaching the past is very important to know about your past and learn from your past. And I like that it ended up being benign too, and not that someone was trying to hurt B'Elanna. That would have been too contrived, and I wouldn't have liked that. But I like that it was someone trying to use B'Elanna to make a point and for a good purpose. So I enjoyed this episode as well.
So above mediocre for you.
Yeah, a little above mediocre for me.
All right, so what would be your next?
So I actually want to pass, because then I'm just getting into like really stretching, getting into really mediocre that I don't think they're that great, and it's 8:20, and I don't want to go on forever. So, if there's another one you really want to talk about, I'll pass to you. If not, I'm ready to move on to least favorite.
All right. So was the Remember one on your list?
It was, yeah.
So just out of curiosity, what was the next one? Did you have another one on your list?
Yeah, I don't know, because if people don't like it, then I'll have to explain why I did.
Okay, all right. Tell me afterwards. I'm curious what it was.
Yeah.
The other, I'll just really quickly talk about the other one on my list. That was Unity.
Okay, that's it.
That's it.
Okay. So I'm glad you liked it. We don't have to explain it or anything.
But I had to like for me. But those first two are like way up high. Where this one I had to go like way back down.
Yeah, it was a stretch for me too to conclude this one. Yeah, that's why I was just like, let's just move on. I don't need to talk about it. But,
absolutely.
But now you're talking about it, so it works.
Yeah. But yeah, we don't have to get into detail about it. But yeah, that's it was a decent episode. I kind of liked it. I kind of think maybe they were trying to do an analogy from socialism to like the type of extreme communism, and this is supposed to be more of like a Canadian socialism. Rather like, and if that's the case, I think and whenever I think of that, it's like that's a really dumb analogy if that's the case, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
that honestly did not occur to me. But this is also an instance where they actually do have some continuity, because then they use this like in Scorpion Part 2.
Yeah. Although I wish they would have continued this further. Like I talked about, like as hypothetical scenario, if they really wanted to make Chakotay and 709 hook up, they could have based Chakotay's experience off of being with the Borg drones. But of course, that would involve actually having continuity. Anywho, yeah, let's move on to our worst episodes. So I think I said you would go first, right?
I don't. Yeah, because you said Scorpion.
Yeah, I went first. Yeah, so you go first with your worst. What was your be?
Okay, so yeah, and again, the bad episodes were bad, but I can think of worse, because like the one that I'm going to name first actually reminded me of a Deep Space Nine episode that I hated, but the Deep Space Nine episode is way worse, and that's Blood Fever. And it reminds me of is it Fascination or?
No, Fascination. Yes, that's what it's called. Yeah.
But Fascination was like everybody was. It was just over the top, like where everybody was horny for everybody except not for the same person who was horny for you, and it was just like it's ridiculous, like Pepe Le Pew on steroids. It was just so ridiculous. This episode reminded me of that a little bit. But not as extreme. But it wasn't good. I didn't enjoy it. And it was also a contrived way to try to start getting Paris and B'Elanna together, which is not a relationship I ever really jived with. And I felt like their whole relationship was thought up in the writer room, and I think you mentioned this in some of your videos recently, how it wasn't developed organically.
Yes.
And then Star Trek does that with relationships, where they just, instead of like going with the flow of when two characters actually have chemistry, they just force feed a relationship. And that was what they were trying to do with Tom and B'Elanna. And they think that they developed it organically because they did it over several episodes, but that doesn't mean that it was developed organically. Exactly. It's still forced. And this was just a really dumb, contrived way to get those two together, and have the Vulcan ensign like obsessing over B'Elanna was stupid. And also, why didn't they just? I've forgotten this, but I remember now rewatching that I asked this question before. Why didn't you just make that the same character from Next Generation?
I know! That's what I kept saying. It's the same actor.
It's the same actor. He's a Vulcan and he's an ensign. And I read on a Wikipedia page, I don't know if this is canon, but they were like, oh, they say it's his twin brother, which is so stupid.
Do they?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if that's official. I just read it on the Wikipedia page. But, like, that's his twin brother. But so stupid. Like, why? But why didn't he just make it the same guy from Lower Decks? Like, he totally could have transferred to Voyager after Lower Decks. Like, the episode, not the show, obviously.
Yeah.
His episode was dumb. See, not as bad as Fascination to me, but still bad. I did not like this episode.
The other thing I want to think about is, like, I think of the Harrison Ford line from Force Awakens. It's like, that's not how the Force works. That's what I want to say about this is not how mind meld or Kung Far works. Like, Punk Fire was showed as like it's gonna drive you to, it's gonna kill you unless you mate, and the only thing that stopped Spock from dying was the shock of having him kill his friend. Whereas in this episode, they can either mate or they can have combat with each other. You can just fight until they're tired, and then Punk Fire goes away. What? And why the fuck is B'Elanna getting punked? Like, that's so stupid. I'm sorry. Like, this whole episode was terrible. But believe it or not, this didn't make. I don't think this even made my top 5 worst of the season. It's just, to me, it's just one, maybe top 10 worst, but it's one of the whole bundle of terrible episodes this season.
Yeah, you're going to say some terrible ones that I'm going to think are mediocre, I think, because to me, this was probably like the worst one.
All right, so let me get into my worst one. This I actually named in the video I did as my 3rd worst of the entire show, and it's towards the end of season 3. It's called Alter Ego, where they did a Fatal Attraction story. It started off with Harry having a crush on a holodeck character, but then they turned into this cheesy, over the top, and at the point where, like, you know, the woman, the holodeck character, started becoming obsessed with Tuvok, and the point where she said, "I won't be ignored, Tuvok. I literally want." Oh my god!
I didn't even catch that. Actually, I didn't even catch that.
And here's the thing: I hate Fatal Attraction. I watched it somewhat recently. I thought it was a horrible, sexist movie, and I think it's terrible to have a cheap emulation of a bad movie in the first place. And this episode was just like, the one saving grace is I kind of like Harry Kim's wanting to be logical in order to get over, but then they just turned it and they made it silly. And that whole like ongoing storyline they had in season 3 about this resort, hanging out at this resort down in the holodeck, was so fucking stupid, and I hated everything. And then when they went over the top with like, see, this is an example of like a message that they were trying to do about beauty or whatever that was done like 50 billion times better in Life Science in season 2, where here they completely like just bungled it and just try to do like a cheap Fatal Attraction ripoff. And like she like was able to like take over the ship and like force Tuvok, love me. It's like it's like one of the worst episodes. I despise this episode.
Yeah, actually, this one almost made I picked out 3 worst, and this one, I ended up going with another one over it. But it was like, I picked 2, and then was like, this one and another one. I was like, yeah, this is pretty bad. But I don't think I despise it as much as you do. Like, I actually didn't even think of Fatal Attraction. You make a good point there. But, and Doomsday says, never seen Fatal Attraction, don't bother. It's not worth watching. A very overrated movie.
You know, it was nominated for Best Picture.
It was just ridiculous. Yeah. It was never that good. That's a good point. I didn't make that connection. But yeah, I didn't love this episode either. I can't argue with anything that you said right there. It's dumb. Honestly, any Harry Kim love stories are just stupid. They. At least through the first 3 seasons, in my memory of the other seasons, I just find them stupid.
No, they don't get better.
I don't disagree with you, actually. I just don't. I didn't have it as like I despise it as one of the worst ever and all that.
It's funny because I didn't hate it as much until my recent rewatch. It's like it dawned on me. It was like, oh my god, I can't believe how terrible this episode is. Why did I never notice this before?
Yeah, I didn't think of it as that terrible, but I can't say that this was a good episode by any stretch of the imagination. Definitely not.
All right, so what's your next worst?
Let me look. So I'm going to go with False Prophets, because why do we have to have the Ferengi one in the Delta Quadrant? I mean, part of me, I remember when I first watched it, part of me was like, oh, that's cool. We found out what happened to those Ferengi from the Next Generation. I would have been happy with, oh, look, Ferengi, let's move on. That's the only like positive thing about this episode is like, oh, it tied up a loose end from Next Generation.
Yeah.
You see what happened to those dumb Ferengi that Geordi and Data went through the wormhole with, and they tried to warn them that the wormhole was going to collapse, and they're oh, stupid humans, they shake too easily or something. And then the last time you see them, they go when the wormhole collapses, which was a good scene. But I didn't have to really spend a whole episode with the Ferengi. I am Ferengi'd out after Deep Space Nine. I did not need to see all those stupid Ferengi episodes in Deep Space Nine. So you're in the Delta Quadrant, and so now you have to have a freaking Ferengi episode. And the whole concept of it was so stupid that there could be a race of people that would just model themselves after the Ferengi. Like, what were they like before? Like, they're just that malleable that they can just turn into like this a sleazy for-profit Ferengi species all of a sudden. That's dumb. This episode is so dumb. And I just did not need to see the Ferengi in my Delta Quadrant.
Yeah, this is another episode that's it's probably been my maybe 10 worst. It's like, to me, it's another bundle of everything in season 3 that sucked, but it wouldn't even make the worst of the worst. And at first I loved the concept of them revisiting the Ferengi from Next Gen. I was like, oh, that's great. Tying up the thread, that'll be amazing. But once I saw the episode, I was like, oh my God, this is so stupid. It's so cheesy, especially the way there's the wormhole. They could just go back to the Alpha Quadrant, but no, we can't leave the Ferengi here. And then the Ferengi kind of just fuck it up for them at the end. I'm like, that was the cheesiest way that they did getting home fake out, by the way. That was the worst way. That was the worst. We almost got home fake out. It was just so terrible. But I can't disagree that's a terrible episode, but it's not even one of the worst for me.
Matthew Ross says Ethan Phillips is a Ferengi, has some skills. I agree. I think Ethan Phillips did a good Ferengi.
He actually played a Ferengi in that terrible, terrible Enterprise Ferengi episode.
Oh, did he? Yeah. So maybe I think that's what he was talking about, because Doomsday said above that there's a Ferengi episode of Enterprise. So Matthew Ross might have been referring to that episode. Yeah. I was thinking of him pretending to be a Ferengi in this episode.
I'm a grand proxy. I mean, that was a little funny, I guess, but I don't know.
Dumb. Most Ferengi episodes to me are dumb.
See, this isn't even one of the worst Ferengi episodes, I think. But
and it's not, compared to a lot of the ones in Deep Space Nine, it's not one of the worst, or Next Generation. But
that one on Enterprise,
I don't even remember that one. So
yeah, you're gonna love that.
But I just like, you're in the Delta Quadrant. You don't need the Ferengi anymore. Why do you have to put the Ferengi in here? That was more of my thing.
All right, so I want to get to my next worst one, which is also my top 5 worst of the entire show of Voyager. And it's an episode called Coda, where, to me, like, I heard the behind the scenes, how they just jumbled up a couple of different story ideas and put it in one episode, and it totally shows. It's like this whole episode is just like a big bundle of mess. Like, it doesn't cohesion. It starts off with a time loop with Chakotay and Janeway getting killed by Vidians over and over again. So I could see the writer say, oh, let's have this idea with the time loop. Where do we go with this? I don't fucking know. Let's just come up with a different episode and shove it into this about some alien impersonating Janeway's father coming and try to kill her. And then Janeway has a vision where the doctor like euthanizes her for the fuck of it because she has a virus or something. Like, even, okay, this is a vision, it's not really happening, but why the fuck would Janeway buy this? So wouldn't Janeway be like, hey, this is bullshit, this is a vision, this isn't really happening? The doctor wouldn't behave like this. Like, that was like one of the dumbest things ever. And then at the end, it felt so much like a terrible original series episode, the way it was like, I'm an alien that travels around and infects people and teaches, I'm there to introduce death. It was such a fucking mess. It was a terrible episode. I think it's one of the worst things that Star Trek has ever done. I think it's a disaster.
It was okay. It was a mediocre episode to me. I didn't see it as a mess at all. I think that it definitely could have been better. Like, I thought like what they were going for could have been made more clear. But I followed it. Like I thought, and, I don't know. I didn't love this episode. Don't get me wrong. I don't think it's great by any means. I did wish that they had stuck with the time loop. When I first started watching it, I was like, huh. Why did Mark not include this in his time travel video? And like, so there must not be, because I didn't remember this episode.
Yeah.
I was like, must not be a time loop, must be something else. Otherwise, it would have been in Mark's time travel video that he just did. So yeah, I think it would have been more interesting to stick with the time loop thing. I didn't hate it. I don't know. It was mediocre to me.
But maybe that's what frustrates me, because that's an interesting concept. But they obviously had no fucking idea where to take it. Like, oh, let's just introduce this crazy alien that's trying to kill. Like, I just think it was one of the worst written episodes of Voyager. And to me, it's like this is the exact example of how season 3 was written in the haste, and they didn't really know what they were doing. But all right, really, can I just throw out my third worst real quick?
Yeah, I'm very curious because I'm very curious.
It was also my top 5 worst of the entire show. I think this is number 6 actually. The episode Darkling, where the Doctor returns evil.
That was going to be my next one. Actually,
that was going to be your next.
That was the one that I ended up choosing on my list ahead of the stupid Fatal Attraction one. I ended up choosing this one instead. But yeah, I didn't like this episode either.
I mean, I usually think that Robert Picardo is an amazing actor. Like, he just pulls in some great performances, but he sucked in this episode. Every time he was playing the evil guy, he was so over the top cheesy. Oh, I'm evil. Oh, let's go.
Yeah.
The whole concept of him, just because he puts these holograms into his program, that he gets the evil side of them and turns into a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde situation where he doesn't remember. He turns into 2 people. One is good and evil. What the fuck does that mean? Like, the whole thing is so dumb. It doesn't make any sense. And this is when it's not enough that Tom Paris and Neelix had to lust after Cass. They have to have the Doctor fucking lusting after Cass as well. I mean, I despise this episode.
I totally agree. Like, I thought the Doctor should have put on a top hat and a cape, and a little beard, like those little black and white films where he's tying up the lady on the railroad track or whatever. You know what I mean? Like those old mustache. Yeah, I think that's where the twirly mustache comes from. Yeah, very mustache twirly, over the top. Really, really bad. I liked how it started. I liked the concept of the Doctor being overzealous with trying to add all these different personalities into his own, and B'Elanna being like, hey, wait, hold on, you don't do that. Like, I liked the start of that, but then they took it in this direction where the Doctor turns into a mustache twirly villain. It's ridiculous. It was over the top. They could have maybe done something interesting with that concept, but they didn't. It was pretty bad. I do agree with that.
All right. Well, I guess we can go ahead and wrap things up here.
One other thing I wanted to just talk about with season 3 that I didn't like, and did Cass and Neelix break up off screen? I didn't catch them breaking up, but
it was so you wouldn't miss it. They actually did break up on screen, but it was the episode, God, what the fuck is it called? Warlord, where Kes was being inhabited by a different person. So it wasn't actually Kes. It was the guy who took over her body. But for some reason, that breakup was binding, which I remember when I first saw that made no sense to me. Yeah.
I didn't think that I assumed wasn't really a breakup because that wasn't Kes. But that
apparently, after that episode, they were no longer together. They were
just so they could have that episode where Cass has another love interest. And I was like, that's when they first mentioned it. I was like, what? Cass was just like, I did like her in the first 2 seasons. They definitely did run out of things to do with her in season 3. And honestly, coming up with the concept of a species that only lives 7 years was probably not a great concept, honestly. Like, I don't know, like, because she would have had to, if she stayed, she would have to die in season 7 because she's old.
Well, it was 9 years, but yeah.
Oh, it was 9 years. Okay, whatever.
But still, yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, and then there's so many episodes I can name season 3. I hated like that before and after one where she
I thought about that as one of my favorites. Actually, I like that.
What? Oh my god, those two soap opera bullet, like she marries Tom Paris.
Yeah, I mean,
marries her daughter, and I actually hated that. So,
I it wasn't great, but I liked it actually.
And then the one where the doctor had his family, I thought that was terrible.
Yeah, the doctor and the family was not good either.
I don't know. I just think like half
that also was, by the way, in the top 10 underrated episodes. They were trying to say that was a good episode.
Oh, I think I like saw a glimpse of that. I'm like, no fucking way am I watching that video. Yeah, because some people really like that, but that was like such a contrived, obvious attempt to pull out the hard screens that wasn't earned in the slightest fucking bit. But anyway,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. I remember when Voyager was first on air, being disappointed that they replaced us cast with 7 of 9, because I saw 7 of 9 as a very, very obvious attempt for sex appeal, putting her in this tight suit, and I didn't love it at the time. Because I was a fan of Cass. I was one of the few Cass fans. But rewatching it here, like, I see how they kind of lost her in season 3. Like, they just didn't have anything for her to do anymore. Yeah. So I could see why that kind of went sideways.
I mean, but to be fair, the way they treated her in her final episode where she left, it made me think that they could have saved the character because they were actually writing her good in that episode.
Yeah.
But it completely ruined her in season 2.
Yeah. Anyway, all right, that's all I wanted to throw that in there too.
Cool. All right, we can go ahead and wrap this up then thank you so much for joining. We did go a bit over time, but I kind of expected it. It's great to get together and talk about Voyager finally, and of course we'll do this again later on when you get later into the show.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit off air too, but I want to talk about maybe like Deep Space Nine. We did 4 episodes in one video. Maybe we split that up. I don't know. Maybe we could talk about that. Like,
no, we did split up Deep Space Nine.
We did split up Deep
Space Nine? We did 4 and 5, and then 6 and 7.
We did do that. Okay, I think we should do that with Voyager too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to talk to you about off air too. Because I agree. Yes.
I think we should do 4 and 5, and so that means it won't be too much longer in the future before we do another one, because I've started season 4, so in another couple months I'll probably get through season 5. I'm not going super fast with this rewatch, but we can do a season 4 and 5 one in the near future.
Cool, awesome. All right. Well, again, thanks for everyone who showed up and watched this long stream. Colonel Doomsday, Allison Fordyce, Matthew Ross. I believe there was a few others who jumped in earlier. Anyone who's watching it who just doesn't like to join the chat or watching in the archives, thank you for everyone for joining. It's a great discussion, and I'm glad you joined us for this. As I said, keep an eye out, and when we're going to be back for more Voyager. But anyway, Alyssa, if you have any announcements, anything you're up to, want to talk about?
Yeah, as I alluded to earlier, I will be back online next week, next Thursday, over on D's Reviews, joining him to talk about Loki episode 2, and I believe, Mark, you are the following week. You'll be on with Darren as well. So that's where you'll be able to catch me next. I'm really looking forward to first seeing episode 2 and then talking about it. I'm looking forward to that. And please join me on my Facebook page, which is let me look at it here. It's Alyssa Jane's Reviews. So if you look up Alyssa Jane's Reviews on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Alyssa Jane Reviews, all one word. You can also follow me on Twitter at AJ Tumko. And by doing one of those things, that will be how you can find out when my new channel will be launching. I'm still planning on it probably in August-ish launch of my new channel. Acton Tomko's channel is gone, but my new channel will be reborn in August. And Allison Fordyce is on my Facebook page. Thank you very much. She commented. She asked me on my Facebook page if Mark was going to rant about Endgame, and I was like, "Oh, I don't know if it will in this video because we're not talking."
Every opportunity knows me well. Every opportunity.
Yeah. So yeah, join me on Facebook, and then you will know when I will be launching my new channel, which probably still planning on August-ish, something like that, where I will of course be covering Star Trek, Star Wars, MCU, and a bunch of other things. Probably not as I don't plan on really doing it as much as what I was doing before, but I'll be back on. So look forward to that.
Cool. Yep. All right. So thanks everyone for joining me. If you're finding me for the first time, my name's Mark. My channel's Enchantment of Eternity. At the moment, I'm trying to do a crap ton of Star Trek episode reviews, getting them out there, and also covering other shows. Like I'm going through the entire series of Better Call Saul, and I just about to upload my final season of The Outer Limits, and then next month I'll have my top 50 or top 40 best and top 20 worst of The Outer Limits. So wrapping up The Outer Limits, and after that, according to Alyssa's suggestion right here, I'm going to watch Star Wars: The Clone Wars and start reviewing that as well. So that's something to look at, which I'll be doing over the summer. So yeah, be sure to check us out for that, and be sure to check us out next time we're here talking about Voyager. Thanks a lot for joining us. See you next time.